How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico. How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico. How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.
Hello there, everybody. It's me, Garrett Kidney, the co-host of You've Got to Be Kidding Me on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
And I am Liam Jones, my full name, and I'm also a part of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network as a co-host for You've Got to Be Kidding Me.
We are a TNA history podcast that covers TNA 1 month at a time. We cover all the drama, all the matches, all the Vince Russo nonsense you could ever want in your life.
Have you heard of TNA? I bet you have, but would it be funnier if two people made jokes over it the whole time? Probably.
So if that sounds like fun to you, check it out on this very Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network, and Liam will do bits and whatnot.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate, Rewind and Rewatch, where we celebrate the last 25 years of the Dragon System. It's November, and for November, we are going back to 2001 with the Toryumon 2000 Project Landing. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed on all podcast platforms and applications. You can find us on social media at Open Voice Gate. If you would like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site. You click the red box that says sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or reoccurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, alongside your co-host, Case Lowe. In case, as soon as I remembered that we had this on offer, the Toryumon 2000 Project Landing is what has been like one of the more anticipated things for us to get into, just because, and we'll get more into it, just like rediscovering like this very interesting time period in Toryumon. So I'm glad we're going to get into this. But Case, I know you have some news to kick us off this show this week.
That's right. We are doing T2P this week. We're covering the timeline leading up to the first Toryumon 2000 show, and then some of the fallout. You know, I think this is a rare show where we do these timeline of notes and then we review the show. And I think with this show specifically, the fallout of it and the aftermath and the influence of it is just as important as how we got here. So a lot of T2P talk coming up. We've talked about T2P, you know, I don't know, probably a million times over the years we've been doing this show, but never this in depth, never this format. Pretty excited to get to that. Two things before we do get there. One, to anybody that watched my sit-down interview with Tony Khan last week, thank you. I greatly appreciate the feedback. I greatly appreciate the view count. I looked awesome at work this past week because people did not realize there was an appetite for wrestling interviews of that kind. So thank you to everybody who watched that. Thank you to all the aggregators out there. I love what you guys are doing. Keep it up. I did not expect Tony Khan letting it slip that AEW might have plans to run in Mexico in 2025 to be the news story that it was. I greatly appreciate it. I love all the aggregation. Thank you guys so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Salt of the earth people over there. And the exciting news is that by the time everybody hears this, again, unless this goes up overnight, which I would not anticipate it doing so, I will have, in the same format as the Tony Khan interview, a sit-down interview with Ricochet that will be available on, it will be the Q101 Chicago YouTube channel, but you'll see it linked on all my social media and in the Voices of Wrestling Discord as well.
Yeah, no, it's somehow you've managed to backdoor your way into having the best interviews with Tony Khan in like over 3 years, man.
I appreciate that. Tony's very fun to talk to. He really is an incredibly nice guy, and he was very gracious with his time. There's a few things that I didn't ask him, some of which I had on my notes that I didn't get to, some of which that came up in the spur of conversation, and that I tabled that I did not ask him, that truthfully is eating away at me. And I really hope that we talk again in a few months, because I have some questions for him based off that interview. The Ricochet stuff, everybody listening to this will be excited to hear. The Ricochet stuff is, again, probably about a half hour, and the first 15 minutes of it are all Dragon Gate. It's a lot of Shima talk. It's very interesting. I wasn't sure if he was going to be into talking about it. I got the impression that AEW, the people that set up the interview, even though I asked for Ricochet specifically, I got the impression they didn't really want me to talk about it. But, I know the press junket Ricochet did today, and with all due respect to all those people, he's going to be asked, why do you leave WWE? What's it like in AEW? How's it different? Are you going to be the World Heavyweight Champion one day? And it's the same reason Tony Khan got excited to talk about Noah with me last week. Like, I don't want to do that. I have a very specific way that I want to do my interview. So Ricochet came in and sat down, and I went, just so you know, I'm a very big Dragon Gate fan. He's like, oh, that's cool. I go, so I really want to talk about Shima with you. And he's like, oh my God, I'd love to. And so on camera, we do about 15 minutes of Dragon Gate talk. He tells a very funny Shingo story. He tells just some interesting stuff about just it goes back to the Mike Seidel story I always tell, where, and I told this to Ricochet in the interview, we were talking about, Mike Seidel team with Yoshino on a house show in front of not a lot of people, and he made one mistake in the match, and Yoshino cornered him backstage, and Ricochet cuts me off. He's like, I know exactly where the story's going. Let me guess. Yoshino told you have to be perfect. Watch me. I never mess up. I go, that's exactly what happened. He goes, oh my God, I heard him say that to so many people, and goes into some interesting philosophical Dragon Gate stuff. And then towards the end of the interview, I asked him if he ever finds himself, given the way that he wrestles, now being like an older curmudgeon-y wrestler and folding his arms and going, the kids aren't doing it the right way. And he gave an answer that intrigued me, because he was explaining that he watches wrestling differently. He watches it through the lens of a Dragon Gate wrestler, and that's how he analyzes things. And his answer to that I thought was super interesting. So it's about 15 minutes of Dragon Gate stuff. We briefly talked about New Japan and his return there, and then it's boilerplate AEW stuff. That is fine. But, quite honestly, he seemed much more excited to talk about Dragon Gate than he did AEW. So it was very fun, and I would recommend anybody that's listening to this, check that out after you listen to this podcast.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And also, I have to imagine, if you are your Ricochets, and especially like your Tony Khans, like in this way, you're doing like the full-on movie press junket, where they, of course, with your station and all of the other stations around its umbrella, you go sit, or you go like pop around, and if there's any other affiliated media that goes around there, it ends up being like 6 or 7 interviews doing the exact same thing. So the fact that you had 2003 Noah takes was probably the most refreshing thing that Tony Khan heard, and I have to imagine that you were the only person over Ricochet's junket day that even brought up the name Shima to him whatsoever.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And that's, it's very interesting, right? Maybe not interesting. I don't want to sound fucking pretentious, but doing these interviews, I have to walk a fine line of I'm under my shoot job banner, and there has to be some level of mainstream appeal to these things in order to keep doing them. And AEW obviously is sending their wrestlers to me to talk about AEW, but it's that exact thing where, again, I know the interviews they're doing today, and they're fine, but they're not interesting. They're the typical radio spot. And if I have the ability to make something more out of it, I'd like to. And I was very happy that Ricochet, I mean, he really glowed when he started talking about Dragon Gate, and it was a very, very good time. So again, I would recommend that to anybody. That'll be up on the same channel that the Tony Khan interview is up, and I'll link it in the Discord and everything. So there's that. I had never had the chance to talk to Ricochet before. He was kind of one of the last few names of any prominent American that's worked Dragon Gate that I had not spoken to about Dragon Gate at all. And so it's very nice to check that off the list. And also, speaking of America and Dragon Gate, Mike, I assume I know the answer to this, but I will ask you anyways. Have you watched West Coast Pro's King of the Indies yet?
No, because I've spent my holiday week catching up with the six-sided ring.
As you should have. And I would recommend that you continue to do so. King of the Indies is out. Shun Skywalker's in it. It's fun. I will say that. It's not great. It's not anything you need to pause this podcast for and go watch it. But Shun Skywalker, I actually think more so in the El Bendito match than the Titus Alexander match. Sorry for the King of Indies spoilers. Was just very fun. It reminded me a lot of the Skywalker that we saw in Kobe earlier this year on the show where he teamed with Bushi against Benkei and Great Khan. I really do think, and again, hopefully this analysis isn't completely eye-roll inducing, I do think Skywalker is sort of an elite level crowd brawler at this point, and the way that he moves throughout the audience is very entertaining. So there was the photo of him using the kid as a weapon. That is in there. That is in the Titus Alexander match. He shields himself behind an elderly woman in the El Bendito match, and it's like, oh man, this guy just gets it. You know, these aren't 4-star classics by any means, but my God, is he an entertaining wrestler to watch.
I mean, you would have to think that for a guy who, I mean, we're now coming up on, he's entering year 3 of basically working a heel style that's so conducive to crowd brawls, and the idea that, you know, the differences between just how crowds operate in Japan versus the United States, he has to be like chomping on his bit. Like, all right, I can get some feedback here. There's some things that people will play along with this a lot more than what probably he can get away with at like KBS Hall.
Yeah, very much so. So when you turn on King of the Indies, don't get distracted by the hard cam. They don't use it that much. And if you don't know what I mean, you will as soon as you turn on the show. And if you've watched the show, you know exactly what I mean. They don't stay on the hard cam too often, so don't get distracted by that. But the Shun matches are very fun. You know, I think there's a larger conversation to be had about what his output in the Americas has been. I'm personally not bothered by it. I thought he had a great WrestleMania weekend. And otherwise, you know, I'm not sure he needs to bust his ass in America. I'm not sure if that would aid Dragon Gate greatly at this point. So I found what he did, though, to be very compelling.
Yeah, like we have done for several weeks the U.S. Indies talk in this. Like, he is at a point in his career and what he's trying to do. And we could contrast that with like how Dragon Gate has really treated this international retrenchment. But I mean, nothing's going to like change anyone's mind for like Shun doing a 3-star Chuck Taylor crowd brawl kind of bit. Like, that's not going to, if anything, the fact that he picked up that kid in it, at least for whatever value you want to put on social media, that went around wrestling social media a good deal, that probably does more for the re-entrenchment than him going out there and just having match of the year contenders with Speedball Mike Bailey.
Very much so. Very much so. So that is all I've got. The good news is, as we go through this timeline, we have some Toryumon in the United States, some Toryumon USA chatter that I was entirely unfamiliar with prior to doing the notes for this episode. So that is a reason to stick around if you're not into T2P, which why would you not be? Because it's Toryumon 2000 project. Mike, it's one of the greatest things there's ever been. Just up top, your thoughts on T2P. I know you've spent the week with this promotion, as have I. It's like reuniting with an old friend, is it not?
Yeah, and I think that doing this after we've already looked at, of course, the Toryumon Japan landing in 99 and then Toryumon X and how that all went through, and spending like the calendar year kind of going through these important times, like leaving this one for last, it really puts it in perspective just because, and I think as we get to the landing show that Disembarcamiento, I believe is what the technical tour called. But as we get into it, just like how like a mature Dragon system at this point kind of was operating, because at this time, like, you're getting close to the 5th year anniversary Ultimo Dragon Gym. Like, these are not the initial people who were, by and large, like, if they weren't already familiar with Ultimo or within the wrestling industry, that was not necessarily the case with this class. And getting an opportunity to kind of sit there, and the nice thing is that a lot of the stuff that the network will put up has gotten up. There are some certain shows that just have not gone up to the network. I think that's because of who actually owns that footage, probably. But this is like a interesting time period with, I think that, like, as we bring the show to the close, I think it would be really worth getting into kind of comparing the landings and how they are, because this one, if King of Dragon and the Toryumon Japan landing was just like turning the wrestling world on its head by the idea of bringing the nightclub to wrestling, this was the show where, and I'll make sure to have this available because of the version that's on the network is not the same full version of the show. Like, if you we have the full show open for the Toryumon 2000 landing, and instead of it just being Dragon Gate brings the club to wrestling, this is actually having like the crowd involved in it, and it just becomes like this whole spectacular thing that just has not been duplicated. And I feel like wrestling in 2024 versus to where it was at the end of 2001, this felt like a time of possibility. And I feel like people going back, and I've done a couple riffs on this, this is the things that people should want to rehash and revisit and try to apply themselves for, not the UWI Bloodsport kind of thing. Like, this is so unique and different in of itself that it's still, it even though like we have like people involved with T2P still to this day, and people from T2P training people still to this day, this is a style of wrestling that very much was of its time, and it's not necessarily replicated, because like the Yave that UT does case is entirely different than what you would even see on just this 11/13/2001 debut of Toryumon 2000 project.
Completely. My advice to anybody listening that has never seen T2P is, we're going to talk about a bunch of Toryumon Mexico matches that are on the network, and you can watch those matches on the network, and we'll put a link in the show notes. I would highly recommend doing so. There's a match we're going to talk about from a Mexican indie with the T2P guys. That is on YouTube. We will link that. That'll be in the show notes. Watch that there. I never encourage people to watch Toryumon stuff that is on the network to watch it off of the network. I think it is imperative that you watch the full Gaora broadcast of the T2P show, the one that is not on the Dragon Gate network. I think the viewing experience is so drastically different. Now, there's 2 different uploads you can watch. There is the 2-hour upload of just the show, and then there is a 2-hour upload that was called T2P The First Tour, and that is most of the first show and then highlights of matches on the rest of the tour, which I think is like it's a crazy thing that T2P had the show in Corkin and then did another 3 shows elsewhere in Japan. That's kind of a wild thing to think about.
And in some of the places they did. I mean, they ended this tour in Nagano, of all places. Yeah.
It's wild. So either of those versions are okay. Both of those versions are out there. Again, I don't ever recommend people going away from the network to watch stuff that is on the network. For all the cuts of, music and promos and the Gaora talking segments that were on these original Vamonos Amigos, I largely, the network edits don't bother me. There's really only a few Vamonos Amigos where it's like, oh man, they cut up this, that really sucks. The edit they use of the T2P show, the Japanese landing, sucks. And I would not recommend watching that. It is the one time I'm going to say, go to your Russian tube site of choice and watch T2P in full as it was meant to be watched.
Right. And even like the clip that I'm going to make available, it is from a Gaora broadcast from 2002. I had to edit out some like 2002 like infomercial commercials. Like, it's worth having that in there versus the version that's up on the network, because this show is about 2 hours if you can find like the longest cut of it. The version on the network, I think, is just over an hour itself.
It's just over an hour. And the whole part of why you should not watch it on the network is the unveiling of the 6-sided ring is one of the coolest things the Dragon system has ever done. It's so dramatic. It's so innovative in the way they do it. It's so fresh in the way that it looks. And they cut all of that out of the network upload. And if you don't have that, you don't really have the proper T2P experience.
Yeah, it's like watching King of Dragon and you don't get to see Magnum Tokyo go through the Korakuen crowd the first time.
It's a great comp. That's exactly it. Two things before we jump into the timeline that you noted. One, table all of your thoughts on the different Japanese landings between the original class, T2P, and Toryumon X. I want to talk about that. This is going to be weird because you're not going to know why. I want to talk about that when we talk about the Shuji Kondo match on the T2P show. I have a ton of thoughts for it there. We'll table that discussion for there. The other thing to note is now, we spent all of 2024 because it's the 25th year of the Dragon system between the Toryumon Japanese landing and now once a month we've done these rewind and rewatch shows. We of course did in January the Japanese landing, and then in February we did the story of Mochizuki contra Mochizuki, and then in March we did the Brave Gate tournament from 2005, and every month we've had something new. We are coming towards the end of the year. Mike and I would like to keep these once a month classic shows going. We have a few ideas for things we'd like to talk about in 2025, but if you have any suggestions of content you would like to hear, whether that be specific Dragon Gate shows, specific Toryumon shows, feuds, other promotions such as Michinoku Pro, Osaka Pro, El Dorado, anything that would tickle your fancy that you would like us to do this format of show for, please let us know so we can sort of gauge an interest on what people want to hear, because we're going to continue these into 2025. January 2025, there's a very specific show that I want to do, but after that, I think the slate is wide open, and I'm game for anything other than rewatching Dragon Gate USA for a second time.
Yeah, Dragon Gate USA, we've done that. We're
done. I literally can't watch that promotion anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I even though I might be rewatching this promotion for something coming out next month.
Okay, very interesting. All right, Mike, you want to jump into the timeline here of the Toryumon 2000 project?
Yes, it's time for us to go all the way back to the year 2000.
Let's do it. I'm going to jump into our notes here, Mike. I'm going to go straight to page 2. I think this is important to note that these are the 5th term Ultimo Dragon students. These are people that were trained by Ultimo Dragon and Skayde, whereas the first class of Yoshimas, Don Fuji, Suas, etc. were trained by Ultimo Dragon and Dos Caras. Of course, T2P is known for their 6-sided ring. That was a gimmick. There is no historical significance to the 6-sided ring. Skayde, I think it's interesting to note, was trained by Brazzo Cibernetico, otherwise known as Robin Hood, who was a frequent wrestler in Hamada's Universal. He is the 4th of the 6 Brazzo brothers. He passed away young in October of 1999, and before he passed away, he was considered to be sort of the top young maestro of all of the Mexican indie scene. And when he passed away, Skayde was a surprise student and basically his clone. And so Skayde took over that mantle and really honed that style, inherited all of Robin Hood's knowledge, and began passing it down. And you see that here as he is the prime trainer of these T2P guys. And in the same way that Skayde was a clone of Robin Hood, many of the T2P guys are clones of Skayde.
Yeah, and I would say that really outside, and we'll get more into him as we get along with this episode, outside of the lucha press, at least internationally, Skayde was not a name until T2P. So his name very quickly got out as, oh, he's the guy in Nakapon teaching these. The Ultimo's new guys and like this new style that they are going to be doing. And it's fascinating because Skayde did have time that he did wrestle as Robin Hood for a bit as well. So like very close to at least Brazzo Cibernetico at the very least. I forgot that he was like the first one that passed away so early. So it probably, I don't know necessarily when everyone ends up in Mexico at that time, but given how the gym operated in the way that at least that you had Ultimo and then usually a luchador that was doing the more hands-on training with that, I wonder how many people actually got some training by Brazzo Cibernetico.
That's an interesting question. Because he passed away in October of 99. So
Right.
we know Skayde's there with the first class. He's not the head trainer that Dos Caras was, but even by the time that Susumu and Kanda are there, they spend a lot of time with Skayde. So you would assume that Robin Hood is there with him. I hadn't thought about that. That's an interesting, I don't know who to go to on that, but that's an interesting point there.
Yeah, and then really by this time, the people that were coming into the gym were such more of a diversified kind of student that you when we talked about the Toryumon Japan landing, it's like, okay, a Dragon Kid coming from FMW, Fuji worked in war, Magnum Tokyo was kind of a rich kid that also worked as a salaryman, Shima worked the Japanese amateur indie scene. You had people that were already kind of around with it, and having someone like Skayde with people who have a lot more of a clean slate in pro wrestling, other than like Masato Yoshino worked the same regional amateur indie that Shima did, it kind of allowed him to more kind of put his fingerprints all over it. So no wonder a lot of them sometimes kind of get labeled Skayde clone.
May 3rd, 2000. This is a Toryumon Mexico show, and we see the debuts here of Naruki Doi, Takayuki Mori, Akihito Teru, and Takuya Murakami, as also the continued inclusion of Motsutsuga Shimizu, who was sort of the lost member of this T2P class, Mike.
Yeah, so Shimizu, that this is all up on the network. You could kind of get through these 5 like matches within 20 minutes. The most interesting one, easily either the Mori or the Milano one, especially for you can kind of see how Milano looked in 2000, and that will be a topic about how drastically he looked over 18 months. Shimizu was originally Susumu's classmate, so he was not even just a T2P guy who fell through the cracks. He was originally a second class guy, and he always kind of, he's the one person who looks the exact same as he does now. Funny enough, like he looks just as kind of scummy as Mototsugu Shimizu looks whenever they let him show up at a Dragon Gate reunion show, you know?
Very much so. Akihito Teru is Milano Collection AT, for those that do not know. So that's all on the network. Main event of that show, Atlantis, Dragon Kid, El Rejo de Jalisco, and his son versus Crazy Max, which was Shima Fuji and Toru and Villano 3 in a 2 out of 3 falls match, which I remember being sort of one of the better, hey, the Toryumon guys are in Mexico, we're going to have them wrestle some CMLL guys. That is one of the better ones to watch.
Yeah, and for like these shows, almost all of them happening in El Capan or in the areas around there, you kind of had to have these other like CMLL wrestlers, or even have like this to actually get people kind of into the door for like a Toryumon show. In a lot of ways, I feel like.
More on Ultimo Dragon using big names in Mexico to draw these Toryumon 2000 project shows in Mexico later on. We go to September 2nd, 2000. We get the debuts of Toru Ito, who became Toru Owashi, Masato Yoshino, Takamichi Iwasa, Oyanagi, and of course, you look at the main event here, and it's Emilio Charles Jr., Ryo Saito, and Silver King versus Apollo Dantes, Peroth Jr., and Milano Collection AT, in his second Toryumon Mexico show, already in the main event.
Already getting a fall in the main event.
That's right. It is so funny when you look at, obviously the way they use Shima in 97 and 98, and then Milano here, and then Ishimori in 2002 and 2003. There's so many similarities of the way that Ultima would progress these guys, where there's one guy that he picks and he goes, okay, this guy's going to win everything. And, I would imagine somebody's going, are you sure he's going to win everything? And Ultimo going, he's going to win everything. And Milano was very much that guy in this class. He had I believe, a submission victory over Emilio Charles in the second fall of this match.
Right. And I think that one of the big things about the Toryumon 2000 project, much more so than Toryumon X and Toryumon Japan, there was like an internal hierarchy with this group that was even, we'll get more into it as we get into the actual landing show, but it was always very much Milano number one. They did a whole tournament about it. He's number one. And then you would see on these shows like, okay, Yoshino has his debut here and it's very much like what you kind of expect it to be. But very quickly, as soon as Ultimo has the idea with him, he becomes like the second favorite toy. And you even have like interesting people like Oyanagi, who ends up being like the most popular, arguably, out of all of them, just because of how different his gimmick is, and getting over to like to some crowds. Like Oyanagi was crazy over in El Capone because he's doing the same gimmick he ended up doing in the landing.
Yeah, because he's awesome. Also, this is not to get too far ahead of ourselves. Oyanagi, who would become Kinya Oyanagi, he is the guy that this time around, and I feel like I've watched this Toryumon debut show, or T2P debut show like 10 times now. He's the guy going through all this footage this time around where I go, oh, I never appreciated him until now. Turns out this guy's awesome.
For me, it's Yagi. It's Takayuki Yagi. God, he is so fucking smooth.
He is something else. Okay, so that takes us to the end of 2000. Again, all of these guys are popping up on Toryumon Mexico shows, but because Toryumon is running pretty close to what would become their full schedule in 2000, there's not that many Toryumon Mexico shows. There is a note here, November 27th in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, that Motsugu Shimizu, who Dave notes as Ultimo Dragon's protege, was injured on the 11-10 show and had to have shoulder surgery. And Mike, that is the last we ever saw of him.
Yeah, no, because he was never really a protege of him. I don't know anything about Motsugu Shimizu, but just the overwhelming vibe that you get about him, it's like, oh yeah, like they just pretty much, after he kind of got hurt and bailed out, they just kind of like, oh, he shows back up in El Dorado. Okay, cool.
It's
Fine.
not incorrect to label him as Ultimo's protege, because everyone in this class is technically Ultimo's protege, but when he's singled out in that verbiage, it is an extremely funny line to me.
Oh, it's amazing.
12-9-2000, this is the end of the year. Young Dragons Cup 2000. You'll never believe who wins this tournament, which was, something they would do annually going back to 1997 to crown the top student in Toryumon Mexico. Milano Collection AT. He defeats Naruki Doi in the semifinals, and he defeats Ryo Saito in the finals, Mike.
Yeah, which is a big thing because, again, Ryo Saito is one of these, is that bridge character who ends up playing such a big role here. Him taking that loss when probably that should have been his Young Dragons Cup win. And instead, it's immediately going over to Milano Collection AT.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you look back at the history of the Young Dragons Cup, it's Magnum in 97, Genki in 98, Kanda in 99. And you think about, okay, Magnum is the guy that when they hit the ground in Japan, he's the focus of the promotion, him and Shima. 98 is Horiguchi. You look at September of 1999, that's when Genki Horiguchi has his breakout. So about 7 months later, you have December of 1999, Kanda wins. Okay, he comes back to Toryumon in Japan. In January of 2000, turns heel. You get M2K right after that. And logically, it would make sense because Ryo Saito was the bridge between the first 4 classes and the 5th class, which was T2P. Okay, this would be his time to win. No. Milano Collection AT gets the win. The interesting thing to note about this, and I did not realize this until I was compiling these notes, we don't have footage of this. And we have footage of Young Dragons 97, 98, 99, and then we definitely have footage of 2002, because that's when Ishimori wins. And I think even 2003.
Yeah,
when Minimo wins. We don't have footage of Young Dragons Cup 2000. I've seen nothing on this show. I haven't seen Milano and Doi. I haven't seen Milano and Saito. And the most devastating thing is, I haven't seen Skayde versus Stalker Ichikawa, which is the second match on this card.
Yeah, no, that's the one that I need to double underline, highlight, and like to make sure it's all that thing gets its full thing uncut. Is a lot of Milano.
Yeah, there's a few Toryumon Mexico hidden gems that sadly we're just never going to see, and it's a real bummer. One of those is coming up. One of the other ones I noticed just a second ago as we were going through these notes, there's a show here on, when is this? Is this 2001 that Doi works this? No, Doi's hurt all of 2001, so it's 2000. Where to go? November 10th, 2000. This is Yoshino, Shimizu, and Negro Navarro versus Doi, Skayde, and Turbo, who was somebody that traveled with Skayde for years and actually ended up spending some time in Dragon Gate in the mid-2000s. So that 6-man tag, even though Yoshino and Doi and Shimizu are only a few months into their career, I would kill to see that match, and we have no footage of it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of like I want to see this 2012 Young Dragons Cup. By the way,
2012 Young Dragons Cup. Okay, hold on. Let me go to this because now I these later stage Young Dragons Cups are just absolutely mental. 2012, you said?
Yeah, I see a listing for 2012. It was supposed to be the 2011 one, but they moved it. Magnus versus Tarus in the final.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I would like to see that as well.
Also participating, Demus and Daisuke Hanaoka.
I like Hanaoka. He can work. I like that kid.
He got a raw deal.
There you go. Okay, so we move into 2000 here. We move into 2001 here. 2000 is all about Milano Collection AT dominating. He comes in May. By September, he's working main events. By the end of the year, he's winning the Young Dragons Cup. It's something to note as we go throughout 2001. The first note here comes from January 22nd. This is the Wrestling Observer newsletter from that date. This is a pivot, and we're going to have a few of these as we go throughout this timeline. This is about WCW being sold to Fusion Media, and Dave notes as he's basically doing a Q&A in this Observer, there's a section about international talent. And Dave says, although contrary to reports going around everywhere, there are no meetings specifically scheduled with New Japan. Bischoff and Masato have been in contact since the negotiations got serious, and it is likely at some point they will meet and do business. Bischoff is also interested in doing business with Yoshinari Asai, which is Ultimo Dragon, and Asai also has a lawsuit out against WCW. Bischoff had promised that the company would take care of him after a botched surgery by a WCW-appointed doctor resulted in his career ending prematurely. But after Bischoff lost power, he was then fired. I mention this because we can only analyze what we've seen and what we know. And it is why Ultimo Dragon is a Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Famer and Gran Hamada isn't. It's because he spent all of that time in America and Hamada did not. It's why even if you and I would not consider Blood Generation versus Do Fixer from 2006 to be the best match in Dragon Gate history, an overwhelming amount of English-speaking wrestling fans would just assume that that is the greatest match in Dragon Gate history. It's why who is now LA Park has the legacy that he does because he was in WCW all these years. And so he is, I would say, other than Rey Mysterio, probably the luchador that people know best. You know, it's the flashy costume and it's the fact that he worked in WCW all these years. I cannot get this vision out of my head. And this is why we bring this up in this timeline. If WCW lives and John Muse books the Cruiserweight division, shout out John Muse, great member of the Voice of Wrestling Discord. If WCW lives just a few years longer, Mike, there's a very good chance Milano Collection AT and his invisible dog would have come into WCW. And that, if that would have happened, that would be something that would still be talked about to this day. Your What Culture Wrestling's type would have devoured that. It, I think, would have been such a capital A, capital T, such a thing. And I'm so devastated that didn't happen.
Yeah, because like with the time frame and everything about Bischoff, Fusient, and Toryumon, Ultimo would not have sent the Toryumon Japan class at this time over there for it. Like if it would have been Milano, it would have been Yoshino, it would have been Kondo. It probably would have been Toru Owashi, which I think would have been very interesting, to be fair. But yeah, you had this, and I don't know where it was kind of listed, but like the relationship between Ultimo and Bischoff at this time, if I'm right, wasn't Ultimo one of the beneficiaries of those Lloyd's of London insurance things because of the trapdoor? Like that money came in because of Bischoff, and that helped launch Toryumon Japan and Ultimo Dragon Gym, if I have my lawsuits right.
That sounds right. That feels like that. If there's ever been a question for David Bixenspan, that feels
Right.
like that's the question.
Yeah, because
That
like
sounds right, though.
because it was known that WCW at those stages would have these massive Lloyd's of London deals out there, and Ultimo and Bischoff kept the positive relationship. I wonder how much of all of this, like talking about WCW, the fact that Ultimo had that devastating arm injury because of the trapdoor, the nerve ending stuff, that might be why Toryumon ends up being Toryumon in some ways because of that money.
That's such a great point. I had never really thought about that. I'm trying to find in a different set of notes here on abandoned project that Mike and I were working on a few years ago. This ended up basically becoming the Dragon Gate USA podcast series that we did. I'm trying to figure out if I have the exact quote of Eric Bischoff on Observer Live talking about Toryumon. I can't find it, but this is something that, it's so crazy. And this is the wrong history to relitigate here, but when you go back and read the Observers in 2001 and you listen to the audio of Eric Bischoff on Observer Live in 2001, it just, they're all planning ahead. And Toryumon, it's certainly not the number one thing they're planning on, but it's a thing that is factored into the future of WCW. And then WCW just goes away. And it's one of the many times, and there's more in these notes here, when you think about WCW and then MLW for literally 2 decades trying to book Toryumon and Dragon Gate guys before they finally did. And then other stuff we have in these notes. It's another example of, we were going to book the Dragon Gate guys, and then this happened, and then we couldn't do it. In hindsight, it's a miracle that Gabe ever brought these guys to America.
Yeah, just with like the trials and tribulations, just over like the 8 years of attempts, and I think there's something to be said. Like I'm getting us off this detour, but the other aspect about why was Toryumon plugged in, and why was that always the aspect, and why after the Luchadors and WCW, Neo WCW was going to be Toryumon and Japanese wrestlers, because there was so much success with the Luchadors, and a lot of that was success also in the pocketbook, like the budget line, and then having the ability to go like, we already have these great young wrestlers that, because they're Ultimo students, we really don't have to pay them a thing, was very easy to plug and play. And like, that was so appetizing for bookers for a long time, just like having the idea of like, we can just go like contract this out. And I feel like that's ultimately, like, getting back to like 2001, that's probably what would have happened.
Well, and not to sound crass, but they had run off all of the viable Mexican talent by that point.
Right. Yeah.
The crude part of it all is they had been so racist to one group of wrestlers that they needed to bring in a literal different race of wrestlers. And I'm sure things would have gone just as poorly, but by 2000 and 2001, the relationship between WCW and any Mexican wrestlers is just non-existent.
Right. And not to completely like sidebar, like, there's a reason Ultimo wasn't a part of that law, the racial discrimination lawsuit too, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
He had that relationship with Bischoff.
Yeah, well, I mean, we tried to paint this picture when we did the show in January about how Toryumon came to be. I think we've existed with Ultimo Dragon as sort of this older, friendly face, albeit lazy wrestler, for longer than we existed with Ultimo Dragon as a prime, relevant professional wrestler. And so it gets lost how influential he was and how much money he was getting paid, and how cozy, whether it was with CMLL or New Japan or WCW, how cozy he was with pretty much every office that he worked in.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder as much for the Toryumon guys, which, I mean, overwhelmingly the positive influence, he has always seemed to be, like, outside of 2004, Ultimo Dragon, you do not find very many people having a lot of negative things to say about dealings of Ultimo Dragon. It's just the giant Toryumon split situation.
It's just Shima and Magnum Tokyo. Otherwise, it's a universal approval rating.
I mean, look at who's around and who isn't now.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Okay, let's continue with the timeline here. We go to February 17th, 2001. This show is on the network in clipped form. Not this show, but this main event. It is a 10-man tag elimination match. Yoshino, Milano, Iwasa, Toru Ito, who is again Toru Owashi, and Yasushi Tsujimoto, who would become Brother Yashi. They are up against Oyanagi, Saito, Skayde, Mori, and Yagi. This is a 10-man tag match. It comes down to Milano and Saito, and we pretty much only get the Milano-Saito final minutes of this match. This is on my holy grail list of I am dying to know what the full 33-minute version of this match looks like. We'll never know. We'll never see it. It's such a shame, because I think the work between Milano and Ryo Saito, even in the only like 4 or 5 minutes we see of it, is so compelling, and I want as much young Milano as we can get, because quite honestly, there's not old Milano out there. I'm devastated we only have this much of this match, but I love what we have of it.
Yeah, like there's a lot of interactions in this match that I wish we'd be able to get to see in the full version. Just like right now, having the ability to see how the fall list goes. And it's like, oh, Oyanagi gets a win over Owashi at 20 minutes, 29 seconds. Like, things like that I find fascinating. I want to see what Skayde does tying up a Yashi into knots, you know? Like, there's
of
things
course,
like...
I want to see what Skayde would do with Yoshino at this stage in his career.
Right, yeah. And it's just, it's part of the fact that just, like, to have these shows, like, taped, and, like, because these were all stuff that they would always have, like, even, like, dating back to the Japanese landing and the introduction of Vámonos Amigos. It was so important for them to have this footage, but you only got to have so much of the footage because, as you've, like, brought up, at this time, there's all the Toryumon Japan stuff that have to be making TV as well.
How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico. How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.
In 2001, and we get into this a little bit more on the timeline, but 2001, it feels like it was the year of the greatest critical acclaim for Toryumon. I mean, Dave and Brian are actively watching this promotion in 2001. And Dave, and we talked about this in the Mochizuki Contra Mochizuki series, Dave is raving about everything he sees. So more on that later. Let's continue with the timeline. March 1st, 2000, we go to X-Law, Extreme Latin American Wrestling. This is their debut. This is on YouTube. We'll link this show in the description. Thank you to Roy Lucier. Of course, he is the one that has the footage of this show on his YouTube channel. He has the full show, which I should note, last three matches, Super Crazy versus Tajiri, Pero Aguayo Sr. versus El Hijo del Santo, and your main event, an XPW World Heavyweight Championship match between Sabu and Damian Seis. Good Lord, that top three. But we are discussing this match for the T2P offer match. It is a three-way, 9-man elimination. Mike, I don't know if you thought about this, but August 14th, 2001 was the first time they did this match televised in Japan. They ran a dry run of it with the T2P students in March of 2001.
Yeah, and this match is just like, it is such a fascinating, like, just kind of piece of business to see, just because you're getting to see a lot of them just like without the limiter plate like put on for them, and not in the pairings that you would further see, because they would fall into their places very quickly. And I had to think, like, this is like the most, now that like we figured out who's who in this match case, before like Royal Brothers become a thing, this is like the most Fukumasa you see, really.
Yes, so let's talk about that, because the match listing on this show and for this match is incorrect. They have it listed as Junya Fukumasa, Milano, and Yashi against Oyanagi.
El Yagi.
Yagi, that's right.
Yeah.
And thank you for clarifying that. They have it listed as Fukumasa, Milano, and El Yagi versus Oyanagi, Mori, and Toru Saito, who is Skayde Jr., versus Iwasa, Ito, and Yasushi Tsujimoto, which is Brother Yashi. The match listing, as it actually is Oyanagi, Mori, and Toru Saito versus Owashi, Yoshino, and Raimu Mishima versus Milano, Junya Fukumasa, and Takayuki Yagi, who was the aforementioned El Yagi. So that is the 9 names in this match. And it is a really fascinating match. I had never seen this before. Did not know this existed until I was reading about it in The Observer. it's like 20 minutes or 25 minutes. I mean, they give these guys an absurd amount of time
too much time, to be honest.
Too much time in a giant building in Nakampan. They claim
Toreo.
there are 8,000 people here almost, which for this first show, I kind of buy it. I mean, there's a ton of people there. And what's interesting to me is that, one, it's funny that Yoshino was mislabeled as Tsujimoto, Brother Yashi, because with the benefit of hindsight and knowing who all these guys are, it could not more clearly be Masato Yoshino in the way that he runs the ropes and the way that he is absurdly jacked for being a young man in 2001. His body is insane. And also, it goes to show that Ultimo really had his sights set on Milano Collection AT, and rightfully so, because I thought Milano was very clearly the best guy in this match. I was not expecting Oyanagi to be the second best guy in this match.
Yeah, and one of the things about this and about this timeline, we're now getting to the point that you're kind of getting to see them as like their fully formed thing. One thing did not really want to bring up about the May thing, like Milano is so scarily skinny, he looks like Kinya Oyanagi right now.
No, that's yeah.
You have like this like slow glow up of everyone attached to this. Like the same thing with like Toru Owashi. He moves like Toru Owashi. He acts like Toru Owashi. He comes out to Sandstorm in his debut match. Like he is Toru Owashi, but you know he doesn't necessarily have like the Luchanko look that we know him at this point. By the time that you get to this X-Law match, look, some of the guys, I mean, Milano never really gets like jacked. Owashi starts filling up, like, but Yoshino is just always like he looks physically like how he looks like in 2018. Like it is wild with him.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting match because, like you said, you know, Raimu Mishima is full on Yuji Nagata clone at this point, which is who he was in T2P. And you have Milano getting a big entrance. You have Owashi coming after Sandstorm. You have Yagi doing the pescatory Yagi gimmick, basically,
Crazy
you would come to know it. Yagi, you're right. Yagi's awesome in all of the footage that we watched, and it's not something I was necessarily anticipating on saying.
Yeah, and Yagi, like when we get to the landing, we'll have our rankings case of who's the most over, and we'll see how high he ends up. But you think about, like, this is before he becomes pescatory. Like but he's still the fisherman gimmick. I can just see like crowds like this. It's like, oh, these are Ultimo students. Who is this fisherman guy? How is he so smooth? He like, you look at like at this time, he is like the first non-hunk to come through Toryumon, and it's just like this bald guy is just like floating through, doing a like kneeling full Nelson to this guy. What's going on here?
Well, I hope this doesn't come across offensive because I mean it so complimentary towards Yagi, but he comes out on this show looking obscenely Japanese, and it as a result gets him a great reaction because the Nakampo crowd is like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, I'm here to watch Santo and Paraguayo. Why am I watching a Japanese fisherman in action? And then it turns into what is such an interesting historical match.
Yeah, and then you have Oyanagi doing his thing. We'll talk about that in a bit, but it's such a fascinating thing. Like, again, you don't get to see a lot of Fukumasa before, like, really ever in his career. Like, Fukumasa is like the Lupin Matsutani of his era, where he's just like in photos everywhere and like in all the press things, but he's just never he doesn't make it really. So it's wild that like he was a part of this match. Like, it's easily like the biggest crowd he'll ever wrestle in front of his entire life.
That's a good point. That being called the Lupin Matsutani of your class is never a good thing. Let's move ahead in the notes here. I'm gonna jump around just a little bit, Mike. Let's go to May 21st, 2001. This is from The Observer. This is just a quick anecdote. Dave says Yoshinari Asai is looking to purchase the old AWA heavyweight title belt owned by Nick Bockwinkel for his Toryumon group. God, I wish that would have happened.
He has the money. Like, Ultimo has the money. I wonder who has that AWA belt right now.
Oh God, I don't know who has it now. Again, we need to phone Bixen for this. That seems like something he would know.
Yeah, the Dave Bix facts check. That's what we need on this episode.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I don't know if the guy. If you remember in Bockwinkel's obituary that Dave wrote, he writes pretty extensively about the guy that ran the Bockwinkel fan club, because he and Bach were tight until the end of Bach's life. I wonder if that guy has it.
That wouldn't surprise me. But if it's like the historic AWA one, like I could see that getting into some squirrely places.
Yeah. Oh, well, is it the same belt that 0-1 ended up buying?
I think Bach had the belt before that. Like you're talking about the prison belt.
Yeah, and 0-1 used that in the mid 2000s. I think it's probably in Japan somewhere.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right, because then Dave Gagner gets the belt, sells it to Otani, and then there you go.
Wow, a dark thought of where that belt might be if it was at one point in the 0-1 Max office. I don't want to know where that
Whose
belt is now.
fingerprints have been on that. Yeah.
I feel like I'm complicit in a crime all of a sudden, so that's not any good. What is good is this upcoming section we're going to talk about here. So April 16th, Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave says Vampiro, who was one of the wrestlers who got fired this past week by WCW because the WWF had no interest in them, is attempting to get back into Mexico and has a tour scheduled starting on May 19th for Toryumon in Japan. Dave is mostly right on this. The one thing I'll note is May 19th was actually a Toryumon Mexico show from Arena Coliseo, and that takes us to the 528 Observer, in which Dave says this, and buckle up, everybody. Vampiro caused major headlines in his first matches back since suffering the concussions last year in WCW. La Afición had a lengthy article about his comeback over the weekend in Mexico, saying that he had called Ultimo Dragon about working for Toryumon. Dragon agreed, but asked him first to work 2 Toryumon shows in Mexico as a favor, since Vampiro has a huge name in Mexico. According to Dragon, Vampiro showed up on time for the 518 show, but was rude to fans to the point that it was disgusting, and sat on the apron during the match, which also showed a lack of respect. On the 519 Arena Coliseo show, which was a 5 p.m. start, Vampiro didn't show up until more than 2 hours after the show started. As it turned out, it looked great to the fans because they did an angle. Ricky Marvin, who was at the show but not booked, took Vampiro's spot in the main event, teaming with Atlantis and Villano 3 against Shima, Blue Panther, and Fuerza Guerrera. Marvin slipped on a dive and hurt himself bad and did a legit stretcher job. This was at 8 p.m., and Vampiro had just arrived and did a run-in during the third fall. However, rather than doing a heated run-in, he stopped to pose for photos with fans holding up the match. Vampiro did get a huge ovation since the crowd didn't know it wasn't a planned angle. Dragon, after the show, said that Vampiro showed a lack of respect to the business. Vampiro said he thought the show started at 8 p.m., but Dragon didn't buy it, saying that every other wrestler knew, and Vampiro was specifically told the night before. Plus, it was in every newspaper the starting time. Dragon said that Vampiro would never work for the Toryumon promotion, whether in Mexico or Japan. Vampiro was telling people that everything is fine, and that he'll be working for Toryumon in the future. The shows themselves, featuring mainly rookies trained by Dragon, got heavily praised, including a particular wrestler called Milano Collection AT. My God.
Vampiro would never work a Toryumon show.
He would never work a Toryumon show. He was, if you remember from the show we did in September, supposed to be on the Dragon Gate in LA show, which was the precursor for Dragon Gate USA, and then he pulled off of that show the night before.
Yeah, no, unless somehow Nosawa is able to pull the strings, it's never happening. Like this is Toryumon's version of people trying to get Toryumon to the USA. It's trying to get Vampiro on the show.
This Coliseo show made TV in 2001, and I think it's Kondo and June, the
right,
opening
yeah.
match, that makes TV. And then it's Yoshino, Milano, and Tsujimoto versus Big Fuji, Suwa, and Toru. So proto-Italian Connection versus locked-in Crazy Max. And then you get this main event, most of the main event on TV. So Atlantis, Ricky Marvin, and Villano 3 against Blue Panther, Shima, and Fuerza Guerrera. And they show what happens with Ricky Marvin. He went for like a springboard Rana and just fell on his head. And then Vampiro comes out, and it's the most awkward run-in you have ever seen before. It is truly something only Vampiro could do. And I love the fact that Dragon says he will never work for Toryumon again, and Vampiro says everything is fine, I will be working for Toryumon soon.
So good.
It's fantastic. June 10th, we go back to X-Law. They had another T2P offer match. This was Yoshino and Milano against Iwasa and Owashi. This match was on YouTube at one point. I have seen this match. It is the first great Masato Yoshino performance. I cannot find this match anymore.
Yeah, Yoshino, really, I feel like he lands like with both feet like fully formed, and like this is the time where I would be more interested in seeing like him kind of fully get himself as a character. Because I had a move question I'll ask later, but I could do it here. He already comes to Japan with the Torbellino and Sol Naciente.
Mm-hmm.
Is he like the first person? Because like he can't be this because of Mystico. The La Mystica is not a move at that point. Is this another thing that Yoshino ends up making, or ends up figuring out a move the same time that like Hiroshi Tanahashi figures out a move?
Well, I mean, no one else does the Sol Naciente, right?
No, I've never seen anyone do it. Yeah, no.
So that's all him. So he would have, whether it was him or Ultimo, I mean, he would have come up with that when he was in Mexico. And then the Torbellino, yeah, I mean, he's 4 years ahead of Mystico at this point. So
just something that popped in my head today.
And I can't really think of anybody else that would have done. I can't think of somebody else that would have done something similar, quite honestly. I mean, this is definitely the tilt-a-whirl arm drag is way more prominent at this point in time than it is now. And there's a million variations of it that all the Michi Pro guys use and Hamada used and the first class of Toryumon guys used. But the Torbellino itself, no. I mean, that he's way ahead of Mystico on that.
Yeah, it was just something that just kind of popped in my head today. Sorry for that sidebar right there.
No, it's like, well, next week we'll do the origin of the crucifix bomb because I know you're dying to talk about that. But this is you know it's been a busy week for Mike and I when we're DMing about who came up with the first crucifix bomb and anyways all of that. So that was June 10th in Mexico. That was again Yoshino and Milano versus Iwasa and Owashi. That footage, if you can find it, please send it to me. It's a very fun match. I just could not find it this time around. That same night in Japan, we're going to go back to Toryumon proper here for a second because it's worth noting as we get prepared for the T2P landing. Okay, we talked about Young Dragons Cup 2000, the finals of that, Milano and Ryo Saito. Milano wins. Ryo Saito then goes back to Japan. In his 2001 is... although it wouldn't be the 2005 that he had where he's fully elevated into a main eventer, Saito in 2001 is a guy. He is a guy on the roster that is producing now not only great matches but memorable moments. And it's worth noting that June 10th, 2001 in Japan is the Bicycle Brothers tag team match, Big Fuji and Ryo Saito versus Chocolate Keiichi and Yasushi Kanda. Just so you can picture where Saito is at in his career at this point, I think that's worth noting.
Yeah, no, 2001, and a lot of that is because T2P was ready to kind of fill the role, and other people on the roster, like Raimu Mishima, were able to fill in the roles. Like, it was time to move Ryo up, and you did by doing, like, the Bicycle Brothers gimmick, like, you had him then fully, like, ingratiated, like, beating people, like, even though Kanda's not on the way out, I mean, having a win over Kanda for someone like Saito was a step up at that point.
Let's have, for this next anecdote here, let's have a Raimu Mishima conversation. We could wait to the show to do it, but I'd rather do it here because
let's do it here.
He comes over to Japan on August 9th of 2001. So the Toryumon, the T2P landing is in November. Mishima is a T2P guy. He comes over here on August 9th and is sent over just to lose a bunch of matches. And then in 2002, he loses a bunch of matches. And then in 2003, it's the same. And then the Florida Brothers happen. And then at that point, basically his relevant career is over. And he retires at the beginning of 2007.
Yeah, because he leaves and then does Diamond Ring or Kensuke Office for like 2 shows and then has like a real bad hernia and retires.
And it is just weird to me because look, I'm not a Florida Brothers guy. I'm the low man on that act. But Yuji Nagata clone Raimu Mishima, and if you don't know why he's Yuji Nagata clone, he wore all blue at the peak of Nagata's popularity when Nagata was wearing all blue. They look identical. They never saw anything in him, did they?
No, and I think with this class, you see very quickly who they believed in and who they didn't believe in. Iwasa kind of ends up in that kind of role as well. You know, like they didn't believe much in Iwasa. And it is kind of remarkable given like the rest of the class who all kind of comes through there. Like there's a very clear delineation point for like, okay, who we think about Toryumon 2000 project as like the frontline players and who the rest of them were. Like your Junes, basically. Your Junes, your Jet Takagis, your Awasas, and like ultimately, sadly, Oyanagi ends up being one of them too.
That's right. Yeah, it's the Mishima thing is it's funny because I look back, I go, man, you know, they were T2P was a product, and we'll talk about this when we read Dave's review of this show, but you know, they seem to be open to not only the wacky submissions, but also some level of striking and in some sort of throwback to the old UWF style. And Mishima's that guy. You know, if you're going to have one guy from this class do that, it'd be him. And he gets sent over to Japan, and, you know, he's Suwa's sparring partner, where he would, you know, he and Suwa would have the opening match on most of the Toryumon shows in 2002 as a part of a storyline, and Suwa would just kick the shit out of him every night. And by that point, his career was over. I mean, there was nothing you could do but turn him into a comedy figure, and I always thought that was weird. I always liked the potential that he had.
Also, think about it in this way. People started debuting in May, and it's the same thing kind of as it is nowadays. The person who's most ready with most potential is the first one up, right? Like that. Like Milano gets the May 3rd debut along with Mori, Doi, and Yagi. Like, given how things kind of play out and where people's stocks were, you know, like that makes sense that they were the first four. Mishima doesn't debut until November of 2000 and is already in Japan by the summer 2001. So only 8 months as an active wrestler in Mexico before he gets called back.
That's super weird. And maybe that was one where with his style, you know, I'm not sure how conducive Mexico would have been, but also I think that's part of the challenge. And, you know, if I was going to send guys over there, especially if it wasn't like, you know, like Doi, right? Okay, so Doi probably isn't somebody, we don't really see a ton of his T2P training come into fruition now, but also, like, I don't entirely know what I'm trying to say here. It's weird that Mishima went over there, didn't learn any lucha, and then came back and then just lost a bunch. And maybe that's why. I don't know what it is. It's just his career is very strange.
Yeah, and I mean, like we all talk about this, and the first network match they have him is already back in Japan.
Yeah, exactly. August 14th, 2001, this is a quick note here. Dragon Kid, Magnum Tokyo, Ryo Saito, they win the UWA World Trios. This is a match we've talked about a bunch here. This is the first three-way nine-man in Japan. And Ryo Saito, now 1/3 of your UWA World Trios champions. September 3rd, 2001, Wrestling Observer Newsletter, Dave says the following: was watching some Toryumon tapes and their big shows for a totally different reason, with the WWF as the most entertaining live shows in the world right now. Bell to bell, they may even be better. Shima has really come into his own as an all-around performer, probably the closest thing in current wrestling to Shawn Michaels in his prime, and he's got all of that athletic ability and charisma in one package. That has nothing to do with T2P. I just think it's really interesting to note how into Toryumon Dave was in 2001.
And I mean, he was saying some things about a future Hall of Famer 23 years before getting inducted. I mean, he really likes comparing Dragon System guys with Shawn Michaels.
That unfortunately makes me worry that at some point Dragon Gate will become NXT 3.0, and I really do not want that.
I mean, I think a lot of things have to pass before that.
No. Triple H is going to do global expansion. Trust me. Japanese wrestling companies are going to be crawling to get involved with him. Oh, wait, Pro Wrestling Noah's already done that.
Yeah. No. He already has his fall guy there.
It's amazing. It's amazing how no one... This is a complaint not about wrestling. This is a complaint about life. No one learns anything ever.
No, never.
History is made up of people making the same mistakes as the generation before them. And with the ID contracts and with the way they're infiltrating Noah, no one has learned anything about recent history, let alone vintage history.
And you also have the fact that Abema airing WWE in Japan too. So you have the fact that, like, and then I think they were like the promoter of note for the shows in Japan over the summer too.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Remember when I said on this show 3 months ago that I was enjoying Noah more now than I had in many, many years? And then the N1 finals happened, and it's like they flipped their stupid switch on again. Because I was arm's length with the booking, but they weren't
We were
doing
even
anything.
like Tavion Heights. This guy kind of rules here.
Yeah, like the N1 tournament was fine. I
Until
liked
the Ogawa match.
and it was just like this promotion again. They weren't reinventing the wheel. They weren't necessarily doing anything super well, but I really liked the in-ring product. It was the most I ever enjoyed Kiyomiya. They were using Monte, which I liked. Alpha Bane and Dragon Wolf had come into their own. I was into it. The N1 finals happened, and they haven't done a single thing since that have appealed to me in the slightest. They just brought in Brian Kendrick, which is insane. They brought him on to wrestle Kiyomiya, which I will not watch with a gun to my head. In every card I look at, it's like, oh, Noah's coming to Cork, and what's it? Oh, let me look at the card real quick. Oh, cool. 8 matches I have no interest in watching, and it's been that way since the N1 finals. It's remarkable what they've done.
Did you see like Kendrick almost broke his ankle in his entrance?
It's a shame he didn't.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? All right, back to the timeline here. September 8th, 2001. T2P comes to Michinoku Pro. We have a match from the 8th and a match from the 16th that make Michinoku Pro TV at that time. There's some interesting notes in the Observer here that I didn't have pasted in, but about how Gaora in 2001 was really leaning into Toryumon and Michinoku Pro and trying to get away from, I think, rings didn't air on Gaora. One of the more old school kind of shoot style adjacent promotions that Gaora had at that point, they were losing their TV time. Gaora was really wanting more Toryumon and Michinoku Pro. Thus, more Michinoku Pro made air in 2001 than had in a very long time. And you get Yoshino and Tsujimoto and Tomohiro Ishii versus Hideki Nishida, Kentaro Mori, Orihara, and the Great Sasuke. I'm sorry, I skipped out Dick Togo. It's Dick Togo, Masato Yoshino, Brother Yashi, and Tomohiro Ishii on one side, and then Nishida, Mori, Orihara, and the Great Sasuke rounding out the other side of that. And then on 9/16, you get Kentaro Mori and Tiger Mask 4 against Yoshino and Tsujimoto. Mike, I have never seen these matches.
Yeah, I haven't either. So Mori at this time, so if you're wondering what Kentaro was, they basically had him do the Madonna's boyfriend gimmick that Spicoli did,
Yeah.
Louis Spicoli did, but instead he was Barbie's boyfriend Ken. So if you're wondering why he was called Kentaro Mori, that was why for that. Yeah, and it's interesting because very quickly after this, you have Muto going over to All Japan, and then that very quickly Gaora gets in bed with Muto there. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he would have been in the process of taking over All Japan like right at this moment.
Right. And Michinoku Pro, I don't remember staying on Gaora soon after. So they sadly become a casualty of Muto, I think.
Another thing to hate Muto for.
Yeah, there we go.
Because this is all footage that I've started. Sorry to cut you off there, but any Michinoku Pro in the 2000s, I was really unfamiliar with. In my head, it was just because there wasn't any of that footage out there. But doing research for the Hamada show, he works a lot of Michinoku Pro in 2000, 2001, and there's actually a ton of that footage out there and available online. I just had no idea, and the stuff I've seen has been pretty fun. So I don't know why I've never seen these matches. I will eventually get to them.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, especially like you see like Toryumon and Dragon Gate and essentially Dragon System become the backbone of Michinoku Pro before they're ready to have like their actual shows. And with what happened in 97 and then later in 99, the Osaka Pro departure, like it becomes like a very important thing for them to have Hamada come in whenever Hamada was back in Japan, have him come in for that. And then having this relationship with Dragon and who still will supply the undercard.
Also on September 16th, this is where we'll have to put on our detective glasses for just a second. There was a AAA pay-per-view from El Toreo and Nakampon, and the second match on that show was the Los Barrio Boys versus Milano, Oyanagi, and who's listed here, Yasushi Tsujimoto. But we know that Yashi was working the Michinoku Pro show on September 16th, and I highly doubt that he worked in Mexico and in Japan on the same day. this would be an easy thing to fix. But despite the fact that this was a AAA pay-per-view that aired and that people have seen, I believe they've seen footage of this show from at least the main event, no one has ever been able to track down this T2P match. And thus, I don't know who Milano and Oyanagi team with, because it definitely wasn't Brother Yashi.
Yeah, no, because Yashi is already being listed as Tsujimoto, so he's already starting to name change stuff already at that point.
That is, I gotta dig up a show poster, see if Lucha Wiki has that, or Lucha DB, because that is interesting. I'm only now noticing that as we go through the notes here. This is something that Rob Viper has listed as a holy grail of his, because it's the T2P guys in AAA, and this only happened once, and it was, Milano getting ready for his Japanese debut, and sadly, we just don't have the footage of this, and it's something I'd really like to see.
Yeah, and Barrio Boys, especially like at that time, where we're seen as like that hot act in AAA. Of course, like Billy becomes more so known for like his overwhelming feud with the Apaches in it, and people might know Alan now better as Dios del Inframundo or Drago. So it's like an interesting like portal into two different eras of a promotion right there. Like because I really do feel like the Barrio Boys do embody like for people who were following AAA at that era, it was a lot of like thinking about the Barrio Boys and then like the storylines that happened afterwards with like Billy and stuff like that.
Very much so. September 30th, 2001, we go back to Japan. This is the date of Absolute Demente 2001. This is the cage match with, let me see if I can remember all the participants, Shima, Dragon Kid, Darkness Dragon, Magnum Tokyo, and Masaki Mochizuki. This is their show. But the T2P class is introduced at intermission. This is the first time that Milano was seen by the Japanese audiences. He cut a quick promo, which got rave reviews from those that watched the show after the fact. Live reports were noting that he was incredibly charismatic and, said, this is T2P. I'm here to take over. I'm Milano Collection AT. I'm an Italian supermodel. And I should note before we move on, Ryo Saito wins the NWA World Welterweight Championship on this show.
Yeah, so again, 2001, his elevation. Now he's held 2 belts at this point, and especially with how Toryumon booked the World Welterweight title, this was like this officially anointed him as the up-and-comer.
All right, here we go. 3 more notes here. 2 of these are very interesting. One of these is a quick note. We go to The Observer, October 1st, 2001. Dave says the following. This is in his section about wrestling in England. A decision is expected just after press time on the future of the 1020 Wrestle Express show. I'd figure it's almost a sure thing that this isn't going to happen on this date. Jimmy Hart and Sonny Ono were stuck in England during the crisis. This is October of 2001, so use your brain. Think about what happened maybe a month earlier, and saw tanks mobilize, and neither seemed anxious to return right away. Some of the talent pulled out over the idea of flying over there just for one date. Announcer Mike Tenay had to pull out because it appears he'll be moving out of his house in Atlanta that weekend. Conan, Juventud Guerrera, and Psychosis, who were doing the show largely as a favor to Hart before going on the Russo tour and missing the first day or 2 of that tour, were told that they would be released from their commitment and could book themselves on the entire Russo tour, which is pretty much a confirmation that this show isn't going to happen on that date, although at press time, the promoters in the UK had not made a final decision. This is relevant. It ties into Toryumon here for this following paragraph. Contracts have been signed with UDirect Pay-Per-View, which then went bankrupt, leaving them without a carrier. Sky Pay-Per-View has an exclusive wrestling contract in the UK with the WWF, so that isn't an option. And a third UK pay-per-view company doesn't have much penetration, nor a lot of interest. The group was also negotiating with ITV, Europe's largest network with weekly coverage either on a regular station or cable, but those negotiations haven't resulted in anything. The 1020 show, which had not sold out the 3,500-seat building in England, with Kurt Hennig versus Steve Corino and Conan versus Vampiro as the headliners, plus bringing in wrestlers from Toryumon for the undercard, was supposed to be used as a television pilot. With no imminent TV deal, having to do a taping on a certain date was hardly a necessity, but after months of hype, canceling is hardly a good sign either. Mike, I have no knowledge of what this show was.
Yeah, this is again like the Bix alarm, and see if him and Zellner know what this is, because I know that there were a lot of promotions and a lot of guys that were trying to, with all the WCW guys out of business and still on that boom of the Attitude Era, we're trying to put on shows in England, and this was not like the down period where they would say that they would have WWF Kane and it would be someone else in the Kane costume. But like Yeah, and I think you kind of see like how quickly WCW kind of falls into the groups. You have like that Russo group. Was that referring to WWA?
I
Is
believe
that,
so.
yeah, and then you have Hart and Ono, which I mean, of course, Sonny Ono. That's probably how you got Toryumon because of Asai, and it makes sense that they would end up on this side and not being interested in doing anything with Vince Russo.
So I found the show on Cage Match. It's TWA Wrestle Express. This show does end up happening on October 20th, 2001. The card is way different. I just sent you the card in our DM here. The card is way different than anything that Dave had said they were promoting. Notably, instead of it being Steve Corino versus Kurt Hennig, it is sadly Steve Corino versus the Sandman, which I have no interest in seeing. There's a Jody Fleisch versus Johnny Storm TLC match. And there is no Toryumon wrestlers on this show. So we have, hey, they could go to WCW. WCW goes away. We have, hey, they could be on this television taping for the TWA. And that, of course, does not happen. And I'll throw it back to you here, but we have one more. Hey, Toryumon guys were almost on this show, and then it didn't happen, coming up in just a second.
Yeah, and again, I think this was, hey, we'll work with Asai. He'll get us our guys in for the undercard dirt cheap. I really think that that's what this all was.
Oh, God, yeah. And you know, it's another example as we tie it back into T2P. I'm not sure if they would have sent the T2P guys for this show, but let's say the TWA had legs and they got an ITV deal and Sonny Ono was involved and they wanted to use those guys. Milano Collection AT on ITV, I think people would have lost their minds over it.
Yeah, I think that it would have been such a absolute just seismic, especially when you look at what that show ended up being at that time. Like, do you want to see a Robbie Brookside match, or do you want to see Sexy Tarzan?
I love, by the way, the main event of the show. Doug Williams versus Robbie Brookside in a TWA British Heavyweight Title Tournament final match. No contest at 3 minutes and 46 seconds. This show must have been fucking atrocious.
There's apparently a link to the entire show. Is it up somewhere?
Oh,
someone on YouTube has put up the entire 3-hour show. Case, you should rest very soundly tonight to know that your interview Tony Khan absolutely dunked on the views of this card.
Look, go to the Red Circle page. It is the holiday season. I love when we get donations. I am afraid to give an exact number of donations required to review this show. Let's just say if everybody listening reaches into their pocket and spares just a little bit of money this holiday season, Mike and I will gladly review Wrestle Express 2001 from the Wrestling Alliance.
From Dagenham, Essex.
Ugh, I've never heard of that place, but I know it sucks.
Yeah, I'm looking at this YouTube channel, and it's like these like 4 random shows that happened, and this is the only one that's up in full. And then it's like a 45-minute interview with former NXT Tag Team Champion Oliver Gray.
This looks like uniquely horrible wrestling. I like this upload here they have of Filthy Phil Powers versus Jake the Snake Roberts. And in the thumbnail of the video, they are clearly wrestling, but there is nothing about Jake's body language that expresses the idea that he is in the midst of a wrestling match in that photo. I really like that.
Yeah, God, it is wild.
Not good. Well, also not good. October 8th, 2001 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. The XWF is doing a 2-hour special and 8 one-hour shows, all of which will be taped on November 13th and 14th in Orlando. But that's as far as the plans are. And from there, use the tapes. This is Dave writing. Use the tapes to attempt to clear television. They opened up an office in Tampa where Hart, the Nasty Boys, and Greg Valentine, who will be head of the planned training school, are working along with Dave Penzer and Janie Engel. A talent list hasn't been released yet, but Hart is high on Kid Cash and Lawler will appear, as well as Conan, and probably a lot of former WCW talent that's in limbo, as well as wrestlers from the past, like the Road Warriors. Sting and Mysterio Jr. are still under contract until the end of the year. There are talks, and this is why we're talking about this, there are talks of bringing in some of the wrestlers from Toryumon. From talking with people involved, they are paying what would be considered very good money for 2 indie dates, but there's nothing confirmed past those 2 dates. Could you imagine, Mike, and Jimmy Hart and Hulk Hogan's XWF, the wrestlers of Toryumon, coming in and doing a show?
God, I'm like terrified at like just how just 2001 racist it was going to be. Because like these are the people who were parts of the infrastructure that had a huge just racial harassment lawsuit against them. Like it would have ended awfully for everyone involved.
I laugh only because we know it would have been racist. The question is, how racist would it have been? And unfortunately, the answer is probably so racist. And I'm so glad this never happened.
Yeah, like it's just such a like just insane thing. Like the idea that like it makes sense like from a business sense. Like, yeah, no, we all remember Ultimo. We know he has the students that Dave writes about all the time that he loves, and we know that Ultimo loves money. And it's just like, imagine how differently like Dragon Gate and Toryumon would have happened if like Ultimo sent his students to go do that. Imagine how much like I feel like it's the kind of thing that might have sped up the split, to be frank, here, you know?
That's true. Because this would have been a thing. I mean, this is, partially what led to the split anyways, was they had the busiest schedule in Japan, and yet everybody was living in basically a dorm while Ultimo was making the money that he was making. And if they were going to do something like this, I would imagine that Ultimo would get paid a large sum of money. Some of that would trickle down to the roster, but Ultimo would be the guy profiting off of these awful American television tapings.
Right. Yeah. And as we saw, all that would have done would have bred discontentment, and just like it would have forged that. Like imagine like imagine Magnum having to deal with that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah, because you're dealing with not only your general racism, but also your general 2001 homophobia at that point.
Right. Yeah. So it's just a completely like just like an absurd fit idea. Just like the proposition is awful.
I'm sad that WCW didn't live long enough to see Toryumon wrestlers in any sort of real way. Obviously, they worked there in 98 and 99, but as like Toryumon, I would have liked to have seen them in WCW. I will sleep comfortably at night knowing that Toryumon never coexisted with the XWF. I would not have wanted to see that.
Yeah, I don't think this show happens. Like through like
no,
the past
it happens because Hogan.
No, I mean, VoiceGate happens probably.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, no, it's a much different timeline. These seismic shifts that would occur had that happen. Our final note is that October 28th, 2001, 2 things happened on this Toryumon show in Japan. 1, Ryo Saito loses his UWA World Trios title. He is still the welterweight champion. And 2, Shuji Kondo makes his Toryumon Japan debut. He wrestles all caps Saito in what was the Saito retirement match. That is on TV. That is a very fun match to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, we miss Saito to this day. It was nice to see him at the reunion shows, but
yes. Of course, not like he's running a taco shop in Kobe or anything.
No, not like he is back in the fold or anything.
No, exactly. All right, so that is the timeline of how we got to the Toryumon 2000 project. These guys started in May of 2000. Milano Collection AT immediately becomes the favorite pupil out of the Ultimo Dragon class. He wins the Young Dragons Cup 2000. In 2001, they work all over Mexico, both under the Toryumon Mexico banner, and then for X-Law and AAA. You see guys slowly make their way to Japan. And then, Mike, we finally get here November 13th, 2001 in Korakuen Hall. It is the T2P Japanese landing, and I hand it over to you.
So we open up to a video saying in 1997, Ultimo Dragon Gym was found, and in 2001 he will show us Lucha Libre Classica, as we see clips from the T2P class in Mexico, and that eventually cuts us to a Korakuen Hall with our good, dear, close personal friend Ulti, and you look down at the ring case, and you can't see a thing because the ring is completely covered by black cloth. Glow sticks are all throughout the crowd. Ulti leads everyone in a countdown, and at 1, the curtains drop and we see the 6-sided ring, and then everyone from the Toryumon 2000 project enters the ring before their opening address. Everyone basically in class rank order, concluding Milano Collection AT. And that brings out Ultimo Dragon to give the opening address and to start us off on the T2P landing. And yeah, this is one of the most incredible things to happen in a Dragon System ring, especially when you consider the fact that there is no wrestling whatsoever that happens in the first 10 minutes of the show.
You know, I forget when we talked about this. I think it was like 6 months ago. We were talking about some Toryumon show, and I was like, man, you know, Dragon Gate, right now in 2024, they're cutting corners with their production, and it's noticeable. I think the talent is there. I think on the big shows, the crowds are there and they're alive, but there was an atmosphere that existed far more in Toryumon than it did Dragon Gate. You know, peak Dragon Gate as we know it is just an awesome atmosphere because it was awesome wrestling. But Toryumon had this vibe to it it was just different. And there's no other wrestling that's really felt like it. And that was part of the production elements they were using at the time. But there was also just a feeling in the building that you were watching something really big and something really important. And nothing embodies that more than the opening for this T2P show and the curtain drop on the 6-sided ring. It feels like you are at a rock concert, the way that there is build up and anticipation for this eventual curtain drop. And then to see the 6-sided ring there, I mean, what a mind-blowing thing that was. And I think to this day, I think the T2P guys probably implemented wrestling in a 6-sided ring better than anybody else ever did. You know, it's not something they would have trained in a ton. You know, it's not like they were working shows in Mexico with that 6-sided ring. This was something that nobody saw coming for the Japanese landing. And it's just an incredible moment. It is, again, no wrestling for the first 10 minutes of the video, basically, and you are already feeling main event level excitement.
Yeah, where the Toryumon Japan landing King of Dragon, they brought wrestling to the nightclub. This time they brought the whole concert experience to the crowd. It was really something, and that led us to our opener. It was Shuji Kondo, fresh off of retiring Saito, versus our favorite wrestling fisherman, Takayuki Yagi. And in a big upset, Takayuki Yagi won with his ground octopus hold.
This match is awesome, Mike. It is so fucking awesome.
Yagi is just one of the smoothest wrestlers. He does a rolling triangle into a standing cattle mutilation up to it, and it is remarkable at this point. And especially seeing how Kondo progresses up there, like the glow up for him, he really kind of fills out, and he becomes really, I mean, when you consider how Toryumon Japan was, he becomes the first real power junior.
I watched this match, and it made me immensely sad about the career of Kondo. And I think I've said this on this show before, but he's been around now. It'll be 25 years here coming up, and he was a focal point of T2P. And then in 2003 and 2004, he's basically the top heel in the company. And then he leaves and he goes to All Japan, and he's with All Japan for a very long time, and that becomes Wrestle One. And he has some modicum of power in Wrestle One until they close, and then he comes back to Dragon Gate. I just feel like if you ran Shuji Kondo's career 100 times, 90 times out of 100, we're getting a better version than the reality that we're living in. This guy, to be able to be this Yave technician that he was, and then also he put on all this weight and became a power junior, and he has this really unique charisma, and he could be a baby face or he could be a heel, and he has a long list of great matches, but it feels like it should be twice as long as that. It just, I really feel like we got maybe the worst Kondo experience possible, because I watch a match like this and I feel like the list of great matches he should have been endless, and it's not, and that's a real bummer.
Yeah, I think if you talk about like the political power plays and then just like situationally, like it does feel like by the time he ends up in Wrestle 1, a lot of the heart is gone by that point. And you see it a little bit in his return since 2000, but like, let's be frank, it's not what we saw in 2001. It's not what we even saw like up to 2004 and even into All Japan. But at a certain point, I just think that the luster just goes away for him. And
yeah, I mean, you know, in Wrestle 1, like, you could always tell when he cared, and that was normally, like, I always go back to the Mochizuki Skywalker tag from the 2018 Junior Tag League, where he really cares about that match, or when Shima comes in a year later, and he really cares about wrestling Shima. But there's also a number of years there where you watch, you know, especially like a Kaz Hayashi Shuji Kondo tag match, and go, oh, that was good. Feels like that should have been better. Feels like that should have been way better, actually, and it just wasn't. And that, unfortunately, has dictated a lot of his career.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, you have him go up against someone like Yagi, who, I mean, Yagi has a injury-shorted career. He ends up being this kind of the trickster GM character up until Ryo Saito. I mean, that's the funny thing, is that he had GM Ryo Saito's job up until Ryo Saito took it over. And funny enough, like, the backbone of this episode, kind of secretly, this is a Ryo Saito episode of Rewind and Rewatch. It's just kind of like a fascinating way that the cards were played, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the spot that jumped out to me here, I DM'd you about this because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I actually replayed this spot about 4 or 5 times watching the match. Kondo and Yagi are on the mat, and Kondo basically he butterflies his arm, so it's almost a cattle mutilation position, and he rolls Yagi over into a crossface chicken wing, and it's my favorite spot on the entire show. Like, Yoshino does crazy stuff, Milano does crazy stuff. That Kondo move right there is unbelievable. It's the type of thing that if Zack Sabre Jr. did on a New Japan show tomorrow, it would get gift and people would lose their minds over it. In Kondo, it's in the middle of the match. Like, it's not even a big spot. I thought it was going to be the finish. It was so cool because I forgot Yagi won this match. Kondo just does this thing and it blows my mind. And then Yagi gets out of the submission and they keep wrestling. That to me is the best spot of this match.
Yeah, it's a spot where you can see the soul leave Takayuki Yagi's eyes.
Well, because if you were in that position,
oh god,
like,
no.
even in a cooperative wrestling match, I would be like, well, my arms were just behind my back. Now I'm choking myself, basically. What just, like, I went upside down for a second. What just happened? This is horrifying. It's really an incredible spot. The other thing that I want to talk about with Kondo, we were talking about the way that all of the different classes between the original class and T2P and Toryumon X landed in Japan. I was watching Kondo in this match, and it's weird because the Italian Connection, 1, Kondo was in the Italian Connection, and then 2, you know, at some points they were like a very clear heel unit, and at some points they're a very clear face unit, and the timeline is murky on, you know, why they would book the Italian Connection the way that they did when they did. I was watching this match and I was going, man, it's really a shame that T2P doesn't position Milano as the babyface and Kondo as this like brick shithouse heel, and that they didn't build T2P around Milano versus Kondo. And then I thought back to the show we did in August about Toryumon X, and I realized I had the same thought about Naoki Tanizaki and Taiji Ishimori, and how instead of focusing on the Sailor Boys, I wish they would have focused on Taiji versus Naoki Tanizaki. And then I thought back to the Japanese landing, and if you look at Toryumon in 1999, there's not like a direct feud. Magnum is doing Magnum things, which is the only way you can describe that. But a lot of the branding in 1999 is, this is Toryumon and here is Crazy Max. And for the rest of 1999, you're going to watch Crazy Max be Crazy Max. And then in 2000, you get the M2K feud. And then in T2P, it's not Milano versus X. This is Milano Collection AT, this is T2P, and this is the Italian Connection. And for the length and the duration of this promotion, you are going to watch the Italian Connection. And then in Toryumon X, it is not Taiji Ishimori versus X. It is, this is Toryumon X, this is Taiji Ishimori. These are the Sailor Boys. You are going to watch the Sailor Boys, whether you like it or not, for the duration of this promotion. And it hit me that they did the same thing each time, just to varying degrees of success. They never launched a promotion with X versus X. They launched it with, here's this promotion, and here's the group that you should care about. And if things last long enough, we will eventually get that group a go-to rival.
Yeah, and I think like the other reason why you didn't have Kondo doing that is you had Toru Owashi right there. Like, that was the thing, is like, could you had the two of them as like the seal unit going up against it? I think that in this, and I think you're right, there is the track record of rampaging. Usually it's a heel unit that becomes super popular in other promotions, and then they bring it home and they do this. Instead of having the unit as in 99, you have the man, really, because it is very much the Milano show. When you look at how, and when we get into the main event, it is very clearly like his show, and everyone else is kind of just slotted behind it, and it just splits very quickly for the people that would stick around, ended up in Italian Connection, or were random affiliates or involved in it thereof. And it makes you wonder, like, if there was like too much success, or they only really have plans to do this just to get everyone situated with it, and then you could have, oh wow, Italian Connection now rampages into Toryumon Japan. Wow, we have Italian Connection versus Crazy Max at our biggest show of the year, Absolutamente 2002. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's what becomes, in the same way that Crazy Max versus M2K happened, it becomes Italian Connection versus Crazy Max, but they don't, this show doesn't end with Milano calling out his future rival. I mean, the show ends with Suwa approving Milano Collection AT, which is super, super weird, but
cool in its way.
It was odd, but it was cool. It's just so strange to me how long they would, in hindsight, looking at all this stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, they never, the first show never has this big show closing angle of like, oh, this unit is going to be the rival of this unit, or this guy's going to be the rival of this guy. It's always get to know the unit, and then they will infiltrate the roster in some way, shape, or form. So what happens with Crazy Max, M2K comes in there, and for the Italian Connection, it's not a T2P rivalry. It's they're going to Toryumon to wrestle Crazy Max, and Toryumon X had so many political implications around it that they never had the chance to do what the Italian Connection did.
I mean, Los Caros Exoticos invading Toryumon Japan would have been just incredible. Incredible. That was not the deck and the hand that they were dealt.
No, it was not.
Match 2, we go to our personal favorite Yuji Nagata clone, Raimo Nishima versus Toru Saito. So one of the people in this class, this became much more of a thing. One of the fortunate things about us doing Toryumon X before Toryumon 2000 project, this actually was like the first kind of mascot character. He would later become Skayde Jr., but it was Raimo Nishima versus Toru Saito. Partway through the match, basically when Mishima was kind of getting in control, Toru came out wearing a crazy white and black jacket and having his bat. He gets a distraction from Toru, and then we get a kind of a Casadora small package for Toru Saito getting what was considered as a huge upset against full-sized Yuji Nagata clone Raimo Nishima.
I think it's super weird that Toru Saito would later work as Skayde Jr., and they didn't have him do that on the promotion that is based around Skayde and his style of wrestling.
I mean, I have to imagine that Skayde determines who Skayde Jr. was, and maybe at that point he did not want to have a Skayde Jr. going off into Japan. I think that's something that happened with passage of time. Maybe.
I don't know. I feel like it would have made way more sense than a mini Toru in this promotion.
But that meant that we had something else fun happening later on. But this was just Raimo Nishima, Daniel was the best thing to ever happen to the guy, frankly. And he was just always kind of there. But this whole entire thing was paying off the fact that he was getting chumped out by a mascot.
Yeah, because I thought Mishima was good in this match. It's every time I see him, I'm like, yeah, that guy could work. It's a shame he never won any matches ever. In Toru Saito, I thought he was fine here. I think it's interesting to note that he reappeared on the first Osaka show this year. He was hanging out backstage, and it was the first time that the T2P guys had seen him in many years. Like, there's a photo of him and Susumu, I think, and Susumu was talking about how he hadn't seen Ryo Saito in forever, and he showed up earlier this year at a Dragon Gate show.
Yeah, that's nice to see. I like that.
He's super active on social media. He's a good follow.
Yeah. Match 3, we had Toru Owashi versus Yun Ogayuchi. Toru Owashi wins with a straight jacket Indian death.
You mentioned earlier that they probably wouldn't have run Kondo as a heel because they had Owashi on this roster. I am now on record, having done the El Numero Uno 2004 rewatch that we did in April of this year, that I think 2004 Toru Owashi might have been an awesome wrestler that has just been grossly underappreciated throughout time. 2001 Toru Owashi might be the weak link on this roster. I do not think he would have been ready for any sort of major heel run at this point in time.
And it's interesting, he's the one that has the biggest transformation other than Milano putting on some pounds.
Yes, very much so.
Over the Mexico stuff, he actually is like weirdly fully formed at this point. Like, this is the same Toru Owashi that you would see over the next 23 years. Like, he's fully formed. He's coming out to Sandstorm. He's stomping around. You know, I mean, he just looks younger and like 50 pounds lighter, you know?
Yeah.
But like, he is like, out of people on the show, it's like fascinating how much the crowd was into June at this point. And especially given that, I mean, he would kind of bum around until Shima kind of takes note of him. He just really not a factor in the rest of T2P.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
After this match, Suwa shows up. He's looking fly as hell. And he goes and he sits in the middle of the crowd. We should note before we probably should have done this at the top. And announced 1898 in Korakuen Hall. It was a sellout. Like,
it looked packed.
It looked absolutely packed. But yeah, Suwa always had like great looks. Like, the dude just looked like this. But it was like, why is Suwa here happening? And why was Suwa here right before Taru facing off against Kinya Oyanagi? Case, I need 3 minutes to discuss what Kinya Oyanagi's deal is.
And give me 15 seconds to explain why Suwa was here. In the storyline at this point, he had quit the company after Absolute Mente, and nobody had seen him since that show. So it was a big deal that he showed up here.
Yep. And he looked just completely fly as hell. Kinya Oyanagi is a gimmick that, Case, have you ever heard of the Japanese holdouts?
No.
So after World War II with the Pacific Theater, and after the two atomic bombs and the surrender of Japan, Japan's imperial forces were really spread out. Like, when you think about East Asia, Case, because I mean, you had the Philippines, you had Midway, you had up and down, basically the Pacific Rim. They were really spread out, and you might, but like from like TV and stuff, you know that these are very forested, rainforest kind of like tropical islands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was this happened several times. There were Japanese military, either the Imperial Navy, Imperial Army, who did not believe the war was over, and they were holding out into jungles of the Philippines, basically. And it became kind of like a thing when people would reach out and find these soldiers, and this would be 20, 30 years later, they still thought that the war was going on, essentially. And it became kind of like a thing, like whenever like someone would do this, and there was like the belief that there was Yamashita's Gold, who was someone's going to get mad at me about this. I think he was a general. I don't think he was an admiral, who had like all of this like gold and wealth that was hidden. He was shot down, and this was all like kind of a part of like, oh, the holdouts, Yamashita's Gold, like a part of culture there. Kinya Oyanagi is supposed to be a Japanese held out soldier who still believes World War II is going on.
I love that. I wasn't
now
sure.
Does his character make total sense now?
I thought he was like supposed to be one of the bad guys from Tarzan.
Okay. Yeah.
This feels loose, like that. The adjacent, I mean, basically a forester, somebody lost in the woods. This kind of makes sense. I love this character. I think they should bring this back.
And it was the most overt act on the show other than Milano Collection AT.
And again, like I said this when we watched the X-Law match during the timeline, like, he's way better than I remember. I've seen the show a bunch, and he's never stood out to me. But watching him through Mexico into now and watching all this stuff in order, he was really good.
Yeah, he was really a smooth wrestler. He worked with the gimmick really well. So he ends up getting hurt in 2003. He comes out of retirement for a Dragon Door, but he decides that he's no longer a holdout guy. Then he becomes like a parody of Billy Blanks and doing anime merchandising until then he later ends up in Michinoku Pro. He ends up wrestling almost through 2016. He almost makes it kind of to the reunion.
It's crazy that he wrestles Toru on the last T2P show.
Well, they had a huge feud.
Yeah, and then doesn't wrestle until 2006. You know, his career, the relevancy of his career is just T2P basically.
Right, and he never like, even though he does like Michinoku Pro, like he does kind of go out to like when Secret Base was a bigger thing, he does do a little bit of that, but does not cross back over to the rest of Lucharesu. And really, after the close of Toryumon 2000 project, he's no longer a full-time wrestler for 3 years, and then he later gets back into wrestling in 2006 with Dragon Door. He never has more than 56 matches a year, and that's in 2013, all of Michinoku Pro.
And, you know, only wrestles for Toryumon proper a handful of times. It looks like the stuff that might have been televised, he wrestled Yagi and Chicken George, so a premium live match. And let's see what was on this show. Arkin and Mochi versus Shima and Fuji. That probably made TV. The three-way with Stalker, I doubt it. Suwa and Taru versus Mishima and Shisa. There's a chance that made TV. And the Darkness Dragon Kid and Saito versus Genki Magnum and Susumu. So that probably made TV. So I don't know. That's a pretty loaded premium live show. I doubt Oyanagi versus Yagi actually aired. And then he works the Christmas Day Corkin in 2002, which was when Norman Smiley came in and Ultimo wrestled Genki, and Rey Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero wrestled Dragon Kid and Raimu Mishima. And he wrestled Stalker on that show. And I doubt that made TV. That's probably the match that got cut.
Which is the shame.
Yeah. I got to look through 2002 TV now. I bet all of his Toryumon proper matches don't even air.
No. And I don't think it is. I think like the last match of his that airs other than that Taru match is his match at Absolumente versus Mishima.
Yeah. Yep. That would be the one. That would make sense.
Yeah, which was how much of an opener was that match? Well, the only match before that had Takamichi Iwasa, who...
And that opener, Genki and Susumu versus Doi and Iwasa, is actually kind of an awesome opener, and it completely outshines the rest of the undercard on that show.
Yeah, it outshines Philip J. Fukamasa one of the few times we actually get to see the guy.
Yeah, very much so.
But basically, Kenya wins this match with a backslide. It plays up the idea that Taru is not able to handle the fact that Oyanagi does kind of this character. And coming out of this, you do get, as Taru showed up in the Mishima match in his black and white jacket, Taru Saito has one of his own, but he also has a giant plastic bat instead of a stick.
I love it.
Yeah, no, and the feud that Taru and Kinya Oyanagi have is about like they kind of almost do a Tozawa Juku gimmick between them. That's what
I'm glad you said that, because that would be my closest comp to it as well.
Right, yeah. So like Kenya is like he drops some of the holdout soldier thing as time goes on, and then instead he like in the feud he like tries to like become like a student pro wrestler. Like this guy was pretty talented. Like that's like it. If he like made it too far, like I don't even know, does Oyanagi even make the Merit Achievement Tournament?
Merit Assessment League, Oyanagi, I was just on his career matches. Let me go back to it real quick. He loses to Yoshino in Mexico. So by the time they come back, yeah, he's not factored in anywhere. I mean, on the next televised T2P show, it's Taru and Taru Saito against Oyanagi and Saito in a tag.
Yeah, and he's just like, after that assessment and all of that is kind of like falling out, he ends up like the last match that really like features him. He ends up in a UWA Trios match that sets up the Tally Connection going for that belt. Like that's like the last thing of real note that he does that's not related to Toru.
His peak was Mexico. That's as simple as it is.
Yeah, no, but this one, it's interesting, like also because he's very clearly like they set him up to be the comedy character of this branch, just like how Stalker was it for there. I wonder who the comedy character was supposed to be of Toryumon X.
The entire roster.
I mean, I would say Taiji Ishimori, actually.
Unfortunately, yes. I think they also thought Taiji Ishimori, and it was devastating the results.
No, absolutely. And then after that, we have the semi-main event of the show. It is a tag team match. Interestingly enough, for like this match and for this like being a Lucha Libre Classica, this is the only multi-member match on the show. It is Masato Yoshino and brother Stevie Tsujimoto defeating Kentaro Mori and Takamichi Iwasa. Yoshino does what we now know as the Torbellino into Sol Naciente to get the submission. Boy, does Cork and Hall love some Masato Yoshino. They don't really get Tsujimoto.
Well, that would be the story of their entire careers. Although I do think Tsujimoto is quite good in this match.
He was probably like low key one of the better mat workers of that time period before he just got all sleazy.
Yeah, it's a lot like Eita, where you watch a young Yashi and you go, why didn't you just do this for your entire career? Why do you have to go be annoying? And I feel the same way about Eita. Look, this is the career of Masato Yoshino. He wrestled for 20 more years after this match, and it all starts here. Yeah, he's absolutely on fire in this match. You can't take your eyes off of a guy who moves that fast or does the moves that he does. And look, Mori's awesome. Iwasa's awesome. It's a good Yashi match, but this is the start of Masato Yoshino as we would get to know him.
Yeah, and you get to see someone that he would end up, I think, having some of his most underrated chemistry with the future and Anthony W. Mori. Like the two of them work so well together in this match. Like if it's Yoshino's match, I would say that it's just you step behind him would be Mori's, and at this time they still didn't really kind of figure out what they were doing with him. He was still Kentaro Mori. This was before the Britney Spears intro. This is before Royal Brothers and all of that. He was doing this, and then you have Iwasa, who I know that Iwasa is my personal fave out of like these kind of people, but he's so up and down basically up until Tozawa Juku that it's just like he's doing like his like miniature devil kind of gimmick. He has what Makoto's face paint kind of looks like, but I mean he works all right here. I just feel like Iwasa kind of finds himself a little bit later into his career.
I like his opening sequence with Yashi because this show, it's a great opener with Yagi and Kondo. Tarusita versus Mishima is pretty good. And then you hit what I felt was personally a little bit of a lull with Owashi and June and then Oyanagi and Taru. And so the legacy of this show kind of hinges on this match. And they come out and Iwasa puts Yashi in a crazy looking submission, like an old school Lucha Libre submission at the start. And Corkin wakes back up and they get a big like, ooh, when Iwasa does that submission. And so from there on, it's off to the races. And you're right, he would have better moments in his career. He would have better eras of his career. This is really like, hey, there's this Masato Yoshino guy. Get used to him being in your life for a long time.
Yeah, and you have to deal with his scumbag friend.
Yeah, for better or worse.
For better or for worse.
That sounds like the story of Dragon Gate 2016. Here's Masato Yoshino, and you're going to have to deal with his scumbag friend.
Yeah. I went 4 on this. I thought that like each time I watch this match, I find more things about it. This time was more about Mori for me, but I thought that like really like you have the great opener, as you said, and you get into a little. I enjoyed Kinya Oyanagi, but that's a long Taru match for others. It really is this match kind of just puts out to the races. This is what you expect here, because also you think about those matches, no one was really using the 6 sides until Yoshino got into the ring.
That's right, because Yagi and Kondo is almost exclusively on the mat. They're not running the ropes a ton. And for the next 3 matches, like that's what's okay. We'll do this now. This is what's so interesting about T2P. You and I both yearn for wrestlers to watch these shows and learn this style. As Grant Akuma pointed out once, this style is so hard to learn, and there are so few people that can accurately teach it that this style will just go away. It's just there's more wrestlers than there are teachers. The teachers that are there, it's not going to work out. It's a numbers game that is not in the favor of this style of wrestling. You and I, if we had billions of dollars, would not run a wrestling company on TNT. We would run a boutique wrestling company where people were forced to learn this style of wrestling, among other things. The interesting thing with T2P, as you go throughout, November of 2001 through January of 2003, which is their last show, it's not a great promotion. It's a very good promotion, but it's not a great promotion. The second show, which is January 2002, might be a better show top to bottom than this one, but it's not as memorable because of the main event of Saito and Milano. And then after that, they do the Strongest Merit Assessment League, which is their El Numero Uno, which in the history of Dragon Gate Vanity tournaments, there's Summer Adventure Tag League 2011, which was a tournament designed entirely around BB Hulk and Akira Tozawa. There is King of Gate 2019, which is designed entirely around Ben K. And before that, there was the 2002 Strongest Merit Assessment League, which was Milano Collection AT making a fool of the rest of the roster. That leads to the Italian Connection. And then from June on, you're dealing with full-on, like, it's not T2P at that point. It's T2P and Toryumon together. The June Corkin is headlined by Milano and Don Fuji, which is a match that I really enjoy. But there's a lot of junk on that undercard. And then you go into the August show in Differ Ariake, which isn't a very good show at all. It's actually, it's far and away the weakest of any of these T2P shows. Yes, you have Absolute Amente. And then, Mike, my question for you sent me a link earlier. It wouldn't open up on my computer. So I'll ask you this on the air. The October 27th, 2002 Toryumon Project show. The main event is Milano, Yashini, and Yoshino versus Genki, Magnum, and Susumu. Do you have any recollection of this match? Because I don't get the feeling this aired because I've never seen it before.
Okay, I'm going to have to get this. So this is a ancient Excel document that I was sent to at one time by one Jeff Lynch.
And I tried to open it up today. It would not open up. Look, let's just say you and I may or may not have a drive that has all of the known T2P footage on it. I did not see this show anywhere in there, which leads me to believe that even though Cage Match hasn't aired, I don't think this show aired. Because I don't remember Genki doing T2P at all.
All right. So I'm just going to do a search here myself on this complete spreadsheet. There's over like 8,000 entries on this spreadsheet. Like, this is how we used to figure out what wrestling we wanted to order and watch, kids. This was how the world operated up before Ustream decided to take care of that.
And in a weird full circle moment, the only time I ever ordered DVDs from Jeff Lynch was when I ordered all of the available T2P DVDs.
Yeah, no, that would make a lot of sense. So what's the date that you're wanting again?
It was October 27th, 2002, T2P and Differ Ariake.
Yeah, I don't have it. Nope.
Okay, so so they straight up do a show in October that I don't think ever airs. And then, they have a great show in December with Yoshino, with Yoshino Kines and Shimo Milano. And then they end it with the farewell show in January of 2003. It's a promotion that is remembered. People say they love T2P. They love 3 matches on the debut show, and that is pretty much it. And that's not a knock on anybody. I love that T2P is thought of as fondly as it is, but it's a promotion with a far more complicated legacy than we remember it for. But the debut show and really just the last 2 matches are so good that it completely colorizes the way we think of T2P.
Yeah, and I think the later kind of situation with the Italian Connection completely changes how people think about it, because as you laid out, you had this overwhelming unit that just kind of colors everything. And when you identify a promotion or a brand with one person and you have all their buddies, that's how you kind of remember that for. And I think that there are a lot of people who have seen other periods of Milano Collection AT and Masato Yoshino and maybe Italian Connection. Because Italian Connection existed up until 2006 as a group, and they transposed that as T2P.
That's a good point. And again, this is all this should all be wrapped in a cocoon of, we love T2P. You know, Mike and I adore this style of pro wrestling.
It's the style of pro wrestling that if I had a promotion, I would be trying to get people to do because it's so different.
But it is at times way worse than people think of it. And I think when people think of the Italian connection, they're probably thinking of Yoshino in 2003 post T2P as much as they're thinking of anything in T2P.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, you had this very short time period that essentially was built around Milano Collection AT looking strong, Toru having a feud with someone doing a comedy gimmick based off of World War II, and you had other pieces that still took forever for them to kind of figure out and get working in some sort of fashion. Because, I mean, Second Doi was around, but he was so hurt that he never becomes like a full presence, and he's now more thought of like, oh yeah, he slides in with T2P, but then you remember him more from like M2K, Shin M2K being his kind of start, you know?
Yeah, mentally, I don't think about Doi as a T2P guy at all. And I mean, he shows up in 2002 because he works the main event of that show, I think. No, he doesn't. When does Doi show up?
He like blows out his knee very quickly.
Well, he doesn't work a single match in 2001. He's out that entire year.
Right.
Which is another, like, it's a weird sliding glass doors thing with this show, is Doi should have been on this show, and I would have loved to know what Doi was going to do, but he straight up doesn't wrestle in the year 2001.
Right, yeah. And with, like, the collection of people, like, does Yagi end up going to Italian Connection to fill that out if you have Doi there, who was a babyface character, and then you could have the babyface side of Mori, Yagi, and Doi? Because Doi was protected at a level. Like, he was not Milano, not Yoshino, but it did kind of feel like that in the way they treat Second Doi since then, that he might have been on level with Kondo or Yashi.
Yeah, because they do, it's a weird dichotomy where Doi and Toryumon proper, he's not taken seriously until 2005, but Doi in T2P is a guy that has some level of respect.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, like, he would have been a strong figure in a T2P Sekigun.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that completely changes that. Well, we haven't gotten much into the main event of the show, funny enough.
It's one of the most memorable matches, I think, for anybody that's seen it. And every time I watch it, it is a weird dichotomy of it not being a great match, and yet it being something that I cannot turn away from whenever I watch it.
Yeah, so it's 2 out of 3 falls. It never really is made a big deal of, but there was a idea about rope breaks being used as a part of it that does not really play into the match whatsoever. I watched the match case. Like, the first time I watched this match, I didn't know it had like a rope break kind of thing. It does not matter into this.
Yeah.
But what does matter, Ryo Saito versus Milano Collection AT. Of course, Ryo Saito, the reigning NWA welterweight champion, loses in 2 straight falls as Milano Collection AT taps him out with a Paradise Lock in 7 minutes, and then follows that up about 7 minutes later, just completely ripping this guy to pieces with the AT Lock. Not a whole lot of effort, really, for Milano Collection AT, as he immediately puts down who would become his big generational rival to close the Toryumon 2000 Project Landing.
It's an insane match. You know, the whole goal of this timeline was to show that, hey, you know, Ryo Saito wasn't some scrub. This was a welterweight champion, a trios champion, somebody that was working main events pretty consistently in Toryumon at this point. And Milano comes in, and the only match I can compare it to, it's the Yave equivalent of when that SummerSlam, like 10 years ago, when Brock Lesnar just destroyed John Cena. That is really the only match I can think of that is like this in any way.
Yeah, and like the remarkable thing is Ryo Saito, the Korakuen crowd, completely behind him because they spent the whole entire year building this guy up as like, oh, he's the up and comer now. In Toryumon, he got through to Big Fuji. They did the team now. Now he's like a serious candidate. And Milano basically for 15 minutes rubs his face into the mat. His big hope spot, Ryo Saito, has a moment that he thinks he can play the cycling Yahoo. The crowd goes insane. It immediately gets turned into a triangle choke without any effort whatsoever. It's not even locked on. AT just rolls through and locks in. He never gets out of the blocks for this match. Like, that is kind of the thing, is that he just gets bum rushed by Yave.
God, I want like a T-shirt that says that, getting bum rushed by Yave. I'm sure that would mean nothing. That would probably mean something horrible to anybody that didn't know what it meant. But that's such an interesting concept. It's just Milano. There's a reason that I picture him instead of Shima or Yoshino or later stage Doi or Mochizuki when it comes to all of these proposed. Hey, MLW is trying to bring in Toryumon. Hey, if WCW lives, they're going to bring in Toryumon guys. Hey, the XWF is going to bring in Toryumon guys. There was a charisma and an ability that Milano Collection AT had at the peak of his powers, which is 2001 to 2005. I've never seen a wrestler like him since. I doubt I'll ever see a wrestler like him again. He is not in the sense of, the way we look at greatest wrestler ever as one of the best wrestlers I've ever seen. He is, however, one of the most captivating figures I have ever seen. And there's a reason that his legacy is this match. They have a match January of 2005. It's Milano's last big match in Dragon Gate. That is a million times better than this match. The 2005 match I'm obsessed with, but it's not this match. Everybody knows this match, and everybody should know this match. It's one of the most important matches in the history of the Dragon system.
Yeah, and it is the one match that, and the feud that, whenever I think about T2P, I don't think about the merit assessment league. I don't really, as much as it becomes about Italian Connection versus Crazy Max, I don't think about that. I think about like what could have happened if Cooler Minds prevailed and this became that bridge feud that really in 2005 felt like, okay, we know we have a Shima Magnum here kind of for that first Toryumon generation, but now as we are Dragon Gate, this is our new current top generation, while you can like look over your shoulder and then you have Shingo Takagi there and Baby Hulk being the next generational rivalry. I just think that like you get to see like this kind of like gasp of what could have been something that built the promotion for the next 20 years very easily. And it just, they don't revisit Saito and AT up until like Dragon Gate and that feud, like that, it gets backburnered pretty hard. But for this like match in this show, it kind of gives you a portal of what could have been and what they tried again in 2005.
Mike, let's end with this. I'm going to read the Observer review of this show. I've got one or two questions to throw at you after that, and then I think we've said our piece on T2P. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
All right, so let's go to the December 24th, 2001 Wrestling Observer. Dave says he saw a tape of the 11/13 debut of the T2P promotion, which is Ultimo Dragon's newest promotion from Korakuen Hall. As mentioned before, and Dave writes originally about T2P in the November 19th Observer for anybody looking for that. He says, as mentioned before, they use the six-sided ring that AAA uses. The show was tremendous. If there was any question who the best pro wrestling trainer in the world was a few months ago, there is no question today. It's one of those things. It's one thing to have one or two guys that you've trained wind up being good workers, but when you've got a dozen rookies who are all tremendous, it speaks volumes to your methods. The crew is much better than the original Toryumon guys, Shima, Suwa, DK, Magnum Tokyo, etc., than they were at the same stage. They do a style of wrestling that mixes all forms, from pride submissions to rings mat work to lucha to Japanese style, and even a little American punch kick, which, since these guys grew up not watching as much American wrestling as other styles, is what they're weakest at. But from a creativity and innovative perspective, these guys are great. They not only do moves that I've never seen, but are all amazing and logically getting into and out of them as they work a style very realistic and base. This is the group to watch next year.
Yeah, I think Dave was pretty dead on, even like his point of comparison about how they were in comparison to 1999 guys. Like, there's so much more polish on these guys. And I think that's one of the reasons why I honed in on the glow up. In 1999, Dragon Kid was not ready for that position.
For a 45-minute main event.
Right. He was not ready for that. Magnum Tokyo hit his peak and just stayed there. and fortunately for Toryumon Japan, his peak was January 31st, 1999. Like, you had that. And we've talked many times about how Shima very much, like, he was this great, like, product in 97 and 98, but it was a couple years before the edges kind of got ground down. And yeah, he did lose some of the acrobatics and speed, but he became a more fully fledged wrestler, especially when you take who he was in 2001 versus 1999. There is a world of difference, I feel like, where you look at Milano is already like rookie of the year caliber in 2001. Like, he was already much better, in my opinion, than anyone else from Toryumon was in 1999 at their landing. And that's not to and that's not to forget about like Masato Yoshino at this point. Yeah, he's still kind of figuring out the charisma aspect, but just as smooth and just as fast as anything you'd see up to 2014 with the guy. So I think Dave was incredibly fair with that.
I think he's right on the money, and it goes to this continued theme of Dave really loved Toryumon and by proxy T2P at this point in time, and falls off of it in 2002, and at times is back in 2003, but then it seems like in 2004 he's totally out of it, and it takes him a few years and a Drangi to really start watching it. And it's a bummer because he writes about it with such excitement. I went through all of these 2001 observers, and when Dave reviews these shows, his words are leaping off the page in a way that typically Dave match reviews don't, but he feels like he's watching something really special. And it's a bummer that he fell off the way that he did. In terms of the impact of this show, I think it's worth noting, and you said this a little bit at the top, Skayde was an independent journeyman in Mexican wrestling before T2P. So without T2P, Quackenbush probably doesn't become obsessed with him and doesn't bring him into Chikara. And so you're looking at the careers of Quackenbush and Hero and Claudio, and then your Granite Kumas and all of your, 2000s Chikara mainstays that would have worked either with Skayde or on the same shows as him at the very least. Their careers feel drastically different. I mean, there might not be Chikara in the way we know it without this show.
No, I think that's entirely fair, and especially given what Quackenbush would say, like his influences, and even if you've like gone and have seen his writing of the time, talking about like the start of Chikara in 2002, it very much does feel like he sees these tapes, he gets these tapes. I mean, he is working with PWI at this time, so he would have access to these things more so than probably your average journeyman wrestler in the Northeast at that time, would you say? So I think that it, like, the number one probably influence for him was he just got really too hopped up on Alan Moore comics. But number two, like wrestling wise, yeah, Chikara looks completely different without T2P, and almost all of that is like, you look at, I mean, American wrestling would look entirely different because T2P, because of all the guys that Quack got to train under Skayde when he was with the Wrestle Factory. I mean, look at like Claudio Castagnoli. You could still see the fingerprints of Skayde all over him.
Oh, very much so. Absolutely.
So I think without T2P, like, I know I made like my whole thing last week about how Shima might have the biggest positive impact to pro wrestling just because of what we see on our TV screen. T2P is just as important in its own way, I feel like.
I would agree with that. Look, the answer is still Shima, but T2P and Skayde and Ultimo together, wildly, wildly important. Let me ask you this, and then I got to go. Do you think the success of the T2P debut show doomed Toryumon X, that T2P had such strong students and such a strong vision and such a strong initial reception that this show takes place November 13th, 2001. Do you think Ultimo woke up on November 14th, 2001 and went, crap, I got to do this again. I got to have a new class. I got to get them ready. I got to get them to Japan. And, I think we've all come to the conclusion with Toryumon X that, hey, if they just would have waited a little bit longer, things would have been okay. But they rushed Toryumon X. And I think, and I'm wondering if you think, it's a result of the early success of T2P.
I think there's a level of that, because one aspect that you didn't kind of mention of this is because they were so successful, they were able to ingratiate themselves very quickly with the already several year several years experienced Toryumon Japan guys that just weren't going to Mexico anymore and didn't have that link to Toryumon X whatsoever. So you have that aspect working with it. I think that the idea that Toryumon X is undercooked, I do think that those guys would have needed more in the oven, but I think that the whole entire... I think a lot of Toryumon X ends up being, and I think some of this might differ from what I was thinking when we did the landing, the fact that they lost all of the people that Ultimo wanted to build the group around when Taiji Ishimori probably shouldn't have been the ace in the first place. That maybe because he was able to, the people that mattered ended up in Italian Connection.
That's
so
true.
Like the idea that at least with Toryumon 2000, like, get enough guys who had enough ability that you were able to kind of consolidate them into one. You'd never had that opportunity to in Toryumon X because you were piecing together what was all left after you lost out on Tajima and other people fall through. And then before you know it, the guy who was essentially kind of positioned to be the Anthony W. Mori, Kentaro Mori of the class ends up having to carry the weight,
I think that's really good analysis. I would agree with that.
But I don't, I just think there's just a lot of things here, but I think Toryumon 2000 project being such a success and ingratiating itself into the overall Toryumon apparatus, that hurts Toryumon X, because Toryumon X never had the opportunity to do that.
I think that's fair.
So that was Toryumon 2000 project. Let me look at what we have penned for December. We have one more left for this. Oh yeah, no, we have a real fun one coming up this month too. But we will be doing more of these in January. As Kay said earlier on in the show, we do have kind of a framework for a couple of them going basically up until February. We want to do these once a month. We're kind of keeping it at least like to the wrestling that like Dragon System is a part of. Really.
Dragon System adjacent, lucharesu, Dragon System adjacent. We'll probably get into some Japanese indie stuff because that's the kind of thing that we really do enjoy. But yeah, just let us know either in the Discord at Open Voice Gate, on either Twitter or on Blue Sky. You can get a hold of us there. We will have all of these links posted in the show notes and also in the Open the Voice Gate channel and the Dragon Gate, not in the Dragon Gate Discord, in the Voices of Wrestling Discord. So check us out there. Again, we are at Open Voice Gate on Twitter and on Blue Sky. Case is at _, in your case. If somehow you've listened through this entire episode and have not checked out Case's interviews, one last week with Tony Khan, and then one that's going to be released by the time y'all hear this with Ricochet, go out of your way to do that. He's at _ in your case. I'm at Fujiheya. Case, you have anything else before we hit end? I do not.
That's going to do it for Open the Voice Gate. Case, we'll be back next week with Modern Dragon Gate for the first time in a few weeks. Yep, we will see you next time. Take care, everyone.
How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico. How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on one Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody in the elevator says, Happy Friday! Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, Happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello there, everybody. It's me, Garrett Kidney, the co-host of You've Got to Be Kidding Me on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
And I am Liam Jones, my full name, and I am also a part of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network as a co-host for You've Got to Be Kidding Me.
We are a TNA history podcast that covers TNA 1 month at a time. We cover all the drama, all the matches, all the Vince Russo nonsense you could ever want in your life.
Have you heard of TNA? I bet you have, but would it be funnier if two people made jokes over it the whole time? Probably.
So if that sounds like fun to you, check it out on this very Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network, and Liam will do bits and whatnot.